7:01. How about that? So, Paul, do you want to do the in-person emergency?
Yeah. In the event of an emergency, there are 2 stairwells in the building. The stairwell over by Dorset Street, near where you came up, and straight to the left and go down at the back. The elevator is also functional. If for some reason the elevator is not working and or is not a good idea, and there is not, it does not feel safe to go down the elevator, there are areas of refuge to call the fire department from. If you're remote, you know how to get out of your place, and Ethan, you've probably got a chart on your door.
I do, actually. I hadn't looked at that. It's probably a good thing to take note of. So let's move on to the agenda. Any additions, deletions, or changes in the order? Marilyn.
I do. I would like to ask that if we could start out with a brief conversation about equity. And I have some specific things I'd like to suggest, that rather than waiting till you get to page such and such and say a little bit, and then, you know, it would be too disjointed. So if would bear with me, I'd like to do that.
Yeah, so I just want to add something to that. I think from a process perspective, I would like to understand how the city is thinking about the decision process. Paul sent out an email saying that early October, the city council will look to do something about actions. And I would like to understand the process of what's exactly going to happen and what is the thinking on where the equity assessment is and how the city council is going to think about it. So I would like to have a discussion on that.
Okay, that seems like a good fit for the larger equity conversation. Maybe we'll start out there to get that information before we discuss the feedback we've gotten from several people about equity. Any other comments on the agenda?
So you want me to start?
Well, I'm a fan of doing that. We do have an agenda item after the agenda item about whether the public has any comments for items not related to the agenda. And I know we've got a couple folks from the public here, so yes.
Hi, so I'm Sarah Dopp from the South Burlington Land Trust. And I did send Sunday evening, I sent out a thing to your committee, a communication from the South Burlington Land Trust, which I hope you've had time to read. And I don't think there's any point in taking your time rereading it, but I would like to make a few additional comments. If this is the appropriate time to do that, I would be glad to, or if you'd rather I wait till later in the meeting, that's okay too.
Well, if they're along the lines of what you submitted for comments, then it might be an appropriate intro to the equity conversation. I'll just ask you to pause for 1 second before you take the floor, just to find out if there's anyone else who has any agenda items that they want to add or other comments that they'd like to make from the public.
Hey, Ethan, just a matter of process that, you know, we distributed a letter from a few residents, and, you know, I did want to talk about that, but since it's on the agenda now, should I hold off until that agenda item? And, you know, I just want to go by whatever the approved process is.
Yeah, I think I mean, the more we can group stuff together, the easier it'll be to like get through to a conclusion. So if you can wait till that comes up, then we'll definitely make time for you. So thanks for letting me know though. Okay. Anyone else? All right. Well, then why don't you go ahead and share the comments that you had, please.
Okay, thank you very much. So the overarching drift of our communication, I think, was that the way the South Burlington Land Trust sees this process is that there are sort of 2 prongs going forward that you are deliberating on. One has to do with measurable, quantifiable measurements of greenhouse gases and et cetera. The other is, shall I say, a softer topic, that is having to do with preservation of land and resources. And one thing that we haven't seen as much of, though I acknowledge that there are some bullets later in the report that touch on agricultural uses in the future. I think we've all been struck, even in the last month or so, with news reports nationally that are emphasizing, particularly in the West, but across the country, crises of water and food production. And these are obviously important to all of us, but a little harder to get a handle on in terms of measurables. And noting on the top of page 7 of your report, a statement that says other sectors like natural areas are important to climate action planning and have been included in the process, though they do not produce a quantifiable or equivalent impact to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and therefore were not included in the SBT scenario. I guess we feel that there are some quantitative measures that could be applied. One thing when we're really talking about agriculture rather than just natural resource conservation in general is the fact that we had a very active sustainable agriculture committee at work a number of years ago, I think 13. And they did a lot of deep digging on these things. So I hope your committee will take a moment, if they haven't already, to really dig into that report and see what they might find there for concrete actions that could be taken. I did want to make a couple of other suggestions for things that could be added. Just in general, I think we felt as though there was a preponderance of commentary about the use of fossil fuels and everything related to that, and very appropriate that that be tackled. And but the overall feel of the report was slanted more in that direction, I think, than in the direction of the beneficial aspects of preservation of land, one of which is really important, and that is providing for our future in terms of feeding ourselves. So we're probably facing having climate refugees moving here, as well as those who are already here. We're going to, in the future, undoubtedly be needing to be more self-sufficient in terms of the growing of food. So I guess those kinds of notions, I would love to see kind of woven in more to the report at large as you go along. Rather than being kind of treated as a separate little sidebar. That being said, there is the section natural areas, adaptation and resilience. One specific suggestion that I might make in there are some bullets of targets and things that could be done. And one that isn't mentioned is the provision of more funds for purchase of land to be conserved. It could be conserved right now for its natural resource values, but also play a role in providing agricultural land at some future time. Or it could be land specifically identified using the SUSAG report, specifically identified for agricultural purposes, as some properties already have been in the city. So I'd like to see that added, that we kind of focus, the city has already been urged to focus on the acquisition of more land.
So Sarah, just maybe to make that concrete, would the action be increased funding, increased revenue for the open space fund,
Yeah.
increased funding?
Yes,
To make a
yes.
specific action, right?
Right. Then I would hope that a stronger case could be made for the fact that every time you build a new house, you are consuming resources, you're adding to greenhouse gases and other emissions. And if you have to cut down trees, or other native vegetation for that purpose, then it's a double whammy. You're losing in two different ways. Another place where you do address these kinds of issues that I'm raising is in your section here, small engines, waste and agriculture food systems. And that's good. You've listed some items here that specifically have to do with agriculture and food systems. But as I say, I think there ought to be a little more emphasis on this generally. When we get over to the appendix, I think there's an attempt to touch on the aspect of cutting down trees. It's at the top of the second page of this appendix. And I have to say, that little section that starts forest tree disturbances, I don't understand what the columns are in that portion of the chart, or what is actually being said by these figures in the chart. So I'm not sure how to clarify that, but I hope you can, the layperson.
Which page are you on?
It's the second page.
35.
35 top two lines.
Yeah, mine didn't all have page numbers, I'm sorry.
My pages are different, but.
So,
Would it be appropriate for me to respond to Sarah's comment on?
Sure.
So the headings, I see your point. So the headings on the previous page, 34 don't necessarily relate to the top of page 35.
yeah,
So I get it. But so the message with that is that the forestry disturbances that South Burlington has seen annually amounts to 1,000 CO2 equivalents per year. And so that is I believe that is an emission. And it says it more clearly in the natural areas section. Conversion of forest to settlement produces approximately 1,000 tons of CO2 equivalent per year. But then to add to that, not in a mathematical sense, forests in South Burlington remove about 8,800 tons of CO2 equivalent. per
yes, I
year.
saw that
Yeah.
note there.
So the appendix is added to include the data that went into the modeling. But I can clarify any confusion in the appendix.
That would be great. And the fact that you sent us back to that section reminds me of one thing I didn't say, and that is, I think we would strongly urge the city to investigate and study a possible ordinance on the removal of trees, some kind of process whereby a landowner would need to apply for trees of a certain size. I don't know how the specifics would work, but not just willy-nilly be able to cut down trees when we know they're such a valuable resource as a carbon sink and holding the soil in every other way, providing habitat, et cetera.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
In that appendix A, where you talk about forestry disturbance / forest to settlement CO2 per year. Is it maybe in the text? I thought I read this, but I didn't see it. How many trees versus how many houses? What does the settlement mean? Is it one tree, one house?
It's not that granular. It's utilizing land cover data that is very generalized. So it's looking at the land cover, basically what is happening on the ground at a particular point in time, and then comparing it to a later point in time, which is 2019. And so, everything's pixelated.
Oh, it was actually in South Burlington.
It was in South Burlington.
Okay.
Yes, this data is unique to South Burlington.
It was just like per acre or?
I don't know what the cell size is off the top of my head, but you can think of it in that sense that there's a certain, you break South Burlington down into a grid, and then each of those grid cells is categorized as a certain land cover, so forest or settlement.
Mhm.
And in the analysis over time, if forest was created to settlement, there was an emission of carbon. And so annually over, I think it was 2001 to 2019, there's 1,000 tons of CO2 equivalent emitted because of that conversion from forest to settlement.
So the release of the carbon from the trees, in addition to the carbon emitted from the construction and maintenance and use of the houses, that's what that, that's what
Yeah,
that's.
I mean, it's
represents.
generally settlement. I can't say whether the construction of the house is included in there. I think it's more about like the removal of the tree produces a
Oh,
carbon
if it's-
emission.
Oh.
And then
Okay,
it
the-
changes
The
to
carbon
settlement.
produced after you take the trees down, not adding in the carbon created, the CO2 emissions created by the new development. That's
Correct.
okay.
Yeah, and I
Well,
think
that's a
It's
really,
the-
it's
the
a really important
conversion
point.
Of
Yeah.
forest to developed land.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to
Yeah,
say
but that's-
before when I said it's like a double
Yeah.
whammy, because you're not only losing the benefit of the trees, but you're adding negatively, if you will,
But
by
but
construction.
pay attention to the fact that that the forested areas in South Burlington do provide storage and, capacity to sequester,
Oh, that's exactly
carbon,
what, yeah,
to
right.
the tune of 8,800 tons of carbon CO2 equivalents per year. So
Right, but. if
and
you
that's
cut 'em
based
down,
on
it's gone.
the land cover that we have, that South Burlington has now. And it's forest, it's only forest is what we were able to quantify.
Uh-huh.
But can I make a point? We have, right, Melanie, has very carefully tried to quantify all our emissions. I think it's fair to say that the emissions embedded in construction are probably not in scope of our emissions, because they're secondary emissions that someone else should be accounting
Yeah.
for, right? And they're
Yeah.
important, but they're not part of our plan because they're secondary.
Yeah,
I don't understand that.
so embodied carbon associated with buildings
Mhm.
is not assigned to South Burlington.
Oh, so you're just looking the city of South Burlington,
No,
not
not the city.
individual residents.
No, residents, everything that
Unless,
we do, but there's when.
unless
if
the
you
equipment
buy-
is,
Yeah,
if the materials are manufactured in South Burlington,
Then-
we would
right.
account for it.
yeah,
But if they
Right.
get manufactured in Colchester, then that's Colchester's emissions,
yeah,
Right.
and we just assemble them here.
yeah.
The trucks that drive through South Burlington to arrive at the site, we count.
So it is true that construction as a global matter emits a lot, but the question is how to scope
Yeah.
South Burlington's share of that.
Mhm.
And we've decided it's too much to account for secondary emissions, what are really someone else's emissions, that they've got to worry about
Oh, it's
that.
somebody in another state or another.
Or
part of the
another-
country.
yeah.
That's what you call by secondary.
Yeah,
And I believe all the ICLEI modeling work is based on leaving the source emissions at the source, not bring it in.
Mhm.
Exactly what Ethan said. If it is manufactured elsewhere, then keep it elsewhere. Don't bring it here.
But the transportation of those materials, where does that
that would
go?
be in scope of this
That's in
plan.
the scope of
That's
this.
in here. So all
To the
the,
extent it's
all the
within the South
trucks and all
Burlington
the,
border.
yeah, all
Yeah.
that's captured.
But I mean, I think the parts that we've tried to understand are, well, in one, it is true that there's some emissions associated with losing that tree cover, but in the scope of the things that South Burlington has, it's 1,000 tons a year versus out of 200,000 tons a year. So in terms of priorities, like the rest of Vermont, there's a lot of towns that have a very high priority on agriculture and forestry, because in terms of their overall portfolio, that's a much higher portion of it. And so just in terms of ranking the priority, I think that's why the science-based targeting got us to the answer that it did. The other thing so there's a couple things that I think would be helpful to go forward with on this, and I don't want to spend too much longer trying to work out all the mechanics of this, but I know that there is some interest in making sure that we capture it appropriately. So making sure that we have a better sense of the trade-off of land use and transportation and some of the other things that we would like to encourage by trying to do some dense development as we've articulated elsewhere in the plan. And I know sometimes that, if we look at the building that you're sitting in now, right, used to be a field, as we've talked about in past meetings. And so what is the trade-off for reduced transportation versus the potential impact of having to cut down some trees or disturb some soil in the process of that, right? It'd be helpful to get more granular information about what is the CO2 impact so that we could make good decisions and be able to help the city figure out how to inform the planning process. So if you have any recommendations for any other data that would help us, that would be great. The other factor that I feel like we've come up against that we haven't been able to answer is sort of a regional view on it, right? Because we know that a lot of these decisions about land use aren't in a bubble, right? There isn't like a universe of South Burlington residents who will always only live in South Burlington and never could live anywhere else and never would move in from anywhere else. And so figuring out how we can start a regional conversation and potentially do some trades or something and you know, between you know, preserved land in some places for, you know, if we need to do more development in South Burlington, but we want to make sure that that's balanced by keeping more land open. Are there conservation swaps we can do or something like that, right? So starting a regional conversation so that we can figure out how to really optimize across the region, knowing that South Burlington is a, you know, desirable area for dense development, and that that's going to be a transportation and you know, benefit in terms of the transportation emissions, which is our #1 source. So if there are any suggestions that you all have, and again, like this is not to put you on the spot, but I think this would be helpful to you know, bring in, because this is not the end, right? Like the plan, once it's finalized, doesn't mean we're done, right? Then we start in on the implementation steps, and it would be really great to have some suggestions from those of you who are closer to this about how to start those regional conversations.
Okay, well, I do have a suggestion if you want it now.
If you have a quick one, sure. Otherwise,
Just really
collect
quick,
it.
because it is referenced in the Sustainable Agriculture Food Security Action Plan, and that is, I don't know about other towns, but when the committee did their report, and as we, you know, I submitted in my comments, and the Land Trust did too, rather than relying on other cities to save their land, we know where our arable soils are, because we did. You know, the city did commission that study, so we know where they are. And at the time, there was enough arable land to keep alive every resident in South Burlington. Now, that's probably no longer the case given how many housing developments and new population, but we already know where it is. And if we don't take care of it, it won't be there. And we don't know what Shelburne's doing, or Colchester's doing, or Essex doing, or, well, we sort of know what Williston is doing. But it doesn't seem like they're leaning forward to protecting their land. So we could feed them as well. So I think as a regional thing, I think it's important, not just for our own residents, but for the neighboring people, that we protect the land that we know can grow food. We know where it is. The city paid the money to do that study. So
does that suggest that when we're doing a cost benefit trade-off, that we should assign essentially an infinite value to that land?
Infinite value?
Not be able to find that there's any other use of that land that would be higher than food? Is it?
Well,
I mean,
what do you think about food and water? I mean,
I don't think we're trying to solve for a future state where South Burlington is effectively cut off from the rest of the world.
I don't know what you mean by, well,
No,
I don't know what you meant.
I think, you know, we're going to evolve toward a day when more and more local food will be part of the mix. And this will, you know, ramp up over time. It's already ramped up greatly since I was a child. So we do need to think forward to the future, not to lock it in necessarily, but to preserve it so that 50 years down the road, when we do really need to produce more local food, we will have the appropriate lands available for that.
Ethan, this is Paul. Can I pose a question to Melanie?
Sure.
So,
Go ahead.
to what extent, Melanie, and remind me, because I've read this plan multiple times, but to what extent does is there a discussion of the cross relationship between these sectors take place? So this task force has had some really good debates about saying natural areas should be conserved, and also high density areas like where we are right now in City Center or Shelburne Road should be areas of priority for development, whether they are a rebuild of an area that's paved, or if there happens to be an empty parcel like next to us, that there are times when it should go in that direction. To what extent, I know that there's the discussion under land use of 16 units an acre or 12 units an acre but is there any discussion of that these are related subjects? Sort of broadly?
I mean, they're related subjects in the sense of the modeling, so but I'm,
No, I mean like related subjects, period, that they are. If we were to say. Not a single more building is to be built in South Burlington, that would dramatically benefit the side of additional impacts of new building, but. There may also be people who then commute more to come through and to our community. I'm just wondering if there's a discussion of that, and maybe that comes into the modeling to say that it's looking at how these impact one another.
I mean, yeah, so what I was gonna say from the modeling perspective, we estimated, I think it's 12, that any new growth that happens in South Burlington going forward would happen in a development pattern that is high density. I think it was 12 and a half dwelling units per acre. So in terms of, conserving natural areas, that could happen in the traffic overlay district to get at the goal of allowing, more growth in areas where there's already transit and biking and walking.
I guess my question was really, is there an acknowledgement of the tension of the issue? Not so much is there a, that's what I was sort of trying to get to. And would that be of value to the task force to have a statement of the tension of some of these issues that, agriculture, for instance, I recall you're saying to me, or maybe Ann said to me, if you look at agriculture and cropland as a strictly energy issue, it produces more emissions than it stores into the soil. So it should go in the negative column from a strictly energy perspective, but of course, that's not climate, that's energy. And so, these things, even within that subject, it's a tension, right? And that's.
Yeah, I don't think that's true either.
Isn't that what?
No, I mean, till,
No-till, yeah.
Farmland is a huge carbon
Sink.
sequestration sink.
We're just talking arable lands here, not.
Can I make a comment? though? I mean,
My point was a larger point
Yeah.
of just tensions between
Yeah.
subjects.
I
But
think
haven't
that
we,
really
haven't we kind of
acknowledged
pulled our arteries, but haven't we kind of tried to affect that balance already in the plan by, with vigorous debate, articulating the desire to save our natural areas for all the reasons articulated in the plan. And we've said, build really dense in the areas that are already walkable and bikeable and their services and, capable of having really vibrant communities. So so we haven't said, don't build anywhere, because you're right, if you don't build anywhere, you don't have people.
And where
So I mean,
does it
that's
say
the
that?
balance we've already struck, right?
Right, and I'm not saying that it's not done, I'm just asking whether it's stated that there is this tension and this is where it landed. That's really that was the question I was asking.
Well, I think the modeling has looked them as discrete variables, what you do in land, what you do in development are discrete. So like, for example, what Sarah is suggesting here, identify land that could be used for future food supply. To me, all regulations are already out there, so it's a matter of the city identifying what those potential areas are and earmark them for the future. Now, how do you protect them? That's a different issue, but I think if I understand your suggestion right, you're just asking about earmarking potential land that could be used in the future.
No.
Earmarking,
Yeah.
not take any action, just earmarking,
Oh.
this is the area.
Well, we have earmarked them though, that's Serene, that's what that study did. So it has a map of all of the arable lands.
Yeah,
I mean, I'll lend you my copy if you want to look.
yeah,
at
no,
it.
I've read it.
So it has identified all of the arable lands
Yeah.
where you could grow food, and it even shows what food, what nutrients could be produced for that. All we're saying is that's the land that shouldn't be built on.
Okay.
Build on Shelburne Road, Williston Road, the dense area that doesn't have arable land. That's the,
But I
That
would
we're
have thought,
protected.
that the process the city went through 6 or 8 months ago would have addressed all that.
they didn't though. They took off the protections for farmlands and ag soils.
Look, if your intent is to create food supply for the future to keep South Burlington sustained, I think it's more of a resilience adaptation exercise that needs to be done within as a region. I mean, I read that report. What struck me was 2 of the 5 or 6 food groups could be supported here. Since the report was developed, how many farms have been developed in South Burlington?
No, it wasn't it was the soil had the capacity.
I understand
Yeah.
that, but if your intent is to provide food supply, I mean, what is stopping people from starting a business that is based on food supply here?
Because it's zoned for housing.
Well, I'm
Well,
just
it-
saying,
it's-
it's business
it's not
economics,
necessarily-
right? It's
Yeah,
business
yeah, the
economics,
costs
right?
of the land.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
It's been
yeah,
very
we're talking
challenging
survival
for a
versus
few-
economics.
Yeah,
here,
But
so-
can I
So-
suggest, Sarah and Roseanne, that it'd be really good to have, like, I know you mentioned one specific thing, which is recommend an increase in open space, which I think makes all the sense in the world as a
Yeah.
recommendation, but there are other kind of specific
The
things.
ordinance about trees is another.
Well, and I mean, Paul will know this, that's
being
actually
talked
already in the
about.
works,
I
it's already in the
understand
works,
that.
right?
I understand.
But if there are other specific things, right, that would be, I think, really good to have. Other specific actions that you recommend put into the plan.
Well, you guys did such a wonderful deep dive on all the other aspects and did a lot of research and pulled out a lot of facts. And I guess we're just wishing that it be balanced with a similar
Yeah.
deep dive on the land use side.
So
Can I just
Maybe
make-
it was, but it doesn't sort of come through the report to me that way.
Just one more comment that this is your plan and you should focus on the things, you should include all the things that you want to.
Yeah.
I would also just encourage that this is the climate action plan. The city also has a comprehensive plan that is supposed to tie everything together. I think one of our challenges is because as we're becoming a larger city, it's natural to say that each plan should include all the things, but then everyone is the comprehensive plan. So and then it's very difficult to be topic focused. And I think one of the strengths of this plan is that it gets to the point of the key issues on
Sure.
carbon.
Sure.
Just like the other one should get to the key issues like the sustainable agriculture action plan
Yeah,
and
just
the
the-
open space plan and the adaptation and all hazards emergency plan, which is a whole different
Yeah,
thing.
if I just
Can we-
could, I
can we get-
totally, I get Paul's point totally on that. It's just that I think we sort of see that these land use issues that we're raising are critically core to a climate action plan. They're not in another plan. They ought to be here because they're critically related to the material that is already there.
So can we give Melanie the last word on this to respond to some of these and maybe propose a path forward? And then I'd like to ask if we can maybe move on to the equity discussion, because I know we've got a lot of things on the
Thank you for
agenda.
your time.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate your input on this. But Melanie, if you have any last thoughts or suggestions on what the next step would
Yeah, thank you. I want to better respond to Paul's question about the trade-offs. I agree that I think maybe a paragraph or a short narrative is needed in the climate action plan to talk about trade-offs. I mean, we have attention, and we talk a little bit about it on page 31 with commuting patterns and how, a good chunk of employees live outside of South Burlington and they're coming into South Burlington. It's about, 17,000 employees live outside of South Burlington, but travel to South Burlington from elsewhere. So we have that tension of needing more housing in South Burlington. And then I'm also hearing, we have the tension about agricultural lands needing, to feed the population here. And there is some narrative in the commuting pattern discussion about, allowing for more housing to give people the opportunity to live here and reduce their vehicle miles traveled, because South Burlington is not an island. We talked a little bit upfront about, the commuting patterns in the region. So I think a discussion about that tension and the trade-offs that Paul was trying to get out. Sorry, I didn't completely understand the question and came at it from a modeling perspective, but I agree. I think it's something that needs to be brought up further, front and center to the climate action plan, because it's a tension between, food systems and, reducing our emissions as the city, as the county, as the state, and a majority of the emissions comes from transportation. So if we can
Sure.
minimize those emissions by housing more people in South Burlington, you know, that's a trade-off and.
And growing food closer to home, so it's not transported.
Transportation is a big issue. I mean, our average piece of fruit travels 1,500 miles. So granted, they may be other places, but transporting food is a huge CO2 contributor.
Yeah, I mean, and there's community gardens, there are places in, you know, the county where, you know, we have a local agriculture community. So, you know, again, back to what Paul said, you know, it's a trade-off and, you know, we weren't able to model emissions from agriculture, it's just focused on forest, but, you know, we could do a better job of discussing what those tensions are between
So
transportation and
I do
agriculture
have
in the
something
next
real
version.
quick, I can show you, just maybe something like this in the section where it says leadership matters. And like the task force recognizes some natural tension between the various policies and actions that are being considered. On one extreme, recommending no growth would limit direct emissions, but may cause an increase in transportation emissions. One way that the plan attempts to resolve this tension is by recommending dense development areas with easy access to walking, biking, and services with conservation of our remaining natural resource areas. I can shoot this to you.
That's
but-
good. Yeah,
Yeah,
Could we give, Chris Trombley's asked for 60 seconds, just make one more comment, and then I really do want to move on to equity, please.
It'll be
Chris.
less than 60. Just quick comment on the density. 16 and 12 and a half, that's really not dense development. That's relatively low, actually. So it just thinking about the arc of time in which a building will be around. I would ask for an openness in some of our more denser areas of a higher number of units per acre. On the transportation commuting patterns, it's interesting. If you look at the data source that was used in the draft action plan for Franklin County and Addison County, half of the residents commute out of those counties to get to their jobs. And so when we talk about reducing vehicle miles traveled, I mean, this is Franklin County that's coming into most likely Chittenden County. And so, you know, we do need, I think there's an opportunity where we can leverage existing public transportation networks that are stronger, more robust here in South Burlington, where it's not as available in those areas. And, you know, for what it's worth, Heinsberg Road does have bus service twice a day. And it's, you know, that's an area that's underutilized. So it just, there's room for a larger conversation about that. Thanks.
Good points. Okay, well, I'm glad we get to cover that. I know that's been a topic of concern for some folks, and I hope this will keep it at the right level of importance in the report. So what's the best way to start this conversation on equity? I feel like
Let's start it if you like.
yeah, I mean, I guess if you could maybe try to, you know, give us some background, but also suggest how we can get, you know, move forward on this, because I feel like we keep kicking it down the road. So
No, I'm not gonna, yes, that's exactly the problem. Okay, so what I wanted to say is, when we first came to the task force and we got a little packet of materials, remember these documents that we had, just transition and the scoreboard for deciding if something was equitable? Those were in our very first packet. And we said, we're gonna talk about equity. The state developed these things in a committee, but they never had time to implement them in their plan because they got up against the clock. The session was going to end in December and they had to close out just saying, that's as far as we got. But we know it's an issue. So we kind of did the same thing. We said, we know it's an issue. We're not quite sure how, because we have all these other terribly important measurement issues, et cetera. So we're going to get to it. And then we said, well, we're going to get to it after we do public engagement. And then maybe we'll look at it. And then what happened is it sort of got mentioned in a lot of places, which is great.
Yeah.
This is better than the previous draft.
Mhm.
I think this is,
I
gets
agree.
more specific. But for example, if you look at page 12, and there's this little box, and there's several of these throughout the report, you know, where you list the idea, and then you say, greenhouse gas reduction, is it high, medium, low? And what is the cost? And there are dollar signs for that. And then there's equity. And so if we look at page 12, on that page, one of the high-level actions is the ordinance that we proposed, and we jump-started. We didn't wait to do the final plan. We said, no, we're gonna go to the city council now with this ordinance. And you look at the equity for it, and it says, consider accommodations and cultural exceptions. But we didn't really do that. We're already into the implementation stage. We're before the city council with the recommendation. We haven't even talked about this. I'm not saying we're bad people and we should all be.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, this is a really hard thing to do. And I could give lots more examples, but I don't want to take the time.
No.
My suggestion is, could we develop a recommendation that says the next step is implementation? And I don't know how that's going to be. If it's going to be a series of working groups for each pathway, you know, like the transportation working group and this working, I don't know what you have envisioned. But whatever it is, it's going to be some group or groups. And if we could have a recommendation that from the get-go, 30% of that group has to be from the affected or something like that.
Yeah, so we have that on page 7, you know, we do talk about equity being
Right,
considered in the subsequent phases to this principal plan.
right.
And there was a memo sent around a few, I think it was in June, about the challenge of applying the just transitions tool
Yeah.
at this high level.
Right.
And that equity would be a focus in the implementation plans. We're, you know, for better or worse, the ordinance kind of came out in front of everything.
It did.
And so it didn't get a chance to go through the implementation phase of buildings and thermal.
Yeah.
Where I see equity being a center point for the sectors once we get to that phase.
And we need, I think, and I guess what I'm trying to get at is, instead of saying equity needs to be considered as we move to implementation, I think we need to say, they need to be at the table.
Yeah,
And I mean, a very specific statement about that, because otherwise it's just, we know equity is important and we know it's an issue because who can afford to buy an EV, blah, 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 but
yeah, and we do say that. We say it's essential that as policies are implemented at the city council level, these populations are included in the process so that policies do not end up causing harm to people.
I know, I
And these
read that, I read that. Well, all right. I think it could be a lot
Sure.
stronger.
Srini,
That's okay,
Can I add a couple of comments to that, Ethan, or?
yes,
I'm
please.
finished.
Yeah, so look, I mean, the overarching theme on equity and climate change is really comes down to two issues. One is, it's a financial burden and a lifestyle change for a lot of people. Second, policies and decisions in the interest of the community and in the interest of the world have unintended consequences. Those are the two overarching themes in all the equity plans that I have looked at. Now, how they have tackled the equity, all the, to add to what Darlene was saying, you need to engage a combination of the people from the Climate Change Task Force, some community organizations that can speak to the vulnerable communities or represent the vulnerable communities, and then participation from the vulnerable communities themselves. We are where we are. I mean, it's what it is. I mean, I don't think we can go back and change, the path here. But I think I agree with Darrell, and it's very, very important that the city council gets a guidance on how they should tackle this before they make important decisions, important budgetary decisions. And make sure that they consider this as a best practice, learn from other cities and communities. I mean, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are all kinds of cities that have tackled this with a population of 40,000, 60,000, 80,000. So somehow we need to figure out, South Burlington City needs to figure out. So I would just focus on how is the city council going to make big decisions without this? I think it's very important that the city council is armed with the assessment, the knowledge, the consequences to make intelligent decisions, I think. So I think it's kind of out of our hands right now. You know, we're going to wrap up in end of
Right, we're
September.
ready to-
End of
yeah.
September, but I do think that the city needs to take the lead on figuring out, you know, learn from the best practices and figure out how we're gonna make this happen.
Can I ask one question though, because I feel the same frustration that it's not easy to figure out how we can fix this now, right? We didn't fix it when we were making it because we were missing some key pieces of information, and so we we solved the problems that we felt capable of solving. That, you know, that's on us, I guess. But if our recommendation is going to be to bring more voices to the table when the next round happens, is it possible that we could at least identify some of those voices? Because I feel like if we have tapped some people
Sure.
and we have folks engaged and lined up, it's going to be a lot easier for the city to accomplish that and a lot harder for them to ignore that. And it's very easy to see how the same pattern would happen again when a new group of people start to look at what are going to absolutely be much more challenging projects, because the implementation plan is going to be even harder than what we're dealing with now, right?
Yeah.
You get into the nitty gritty of all the money and the rules and the, you know, legal stuff that we got to deal with. It's going to be a big project. It's going to be easy for the struct. So I don't know, right? Like several weeks back, I thought, oh, we're going to find people, and I didn't even know where to start. Like it's not a yellow pages for equity.
Yeah.
Right, and we can even footnote for the city council's benefit or put in cities that have done it, you know, how they did that very thing of bringing people in and working
Yeah.
jointly. It's really, it's a very interesting process, but in any case, I can send you some notes if you want.
Sure.
Yeah, Paul.
Two notes. One, you know, to me, one of the things that this is, this effort and the discussions around equity over the last few months, several months have highlighted is that structurally, to get to the point that I think just about everybody in this discussion is aspiring to, is not a, well, if we could back up 2 months and have done it differently. This is it's a community
Sure.
structure. And so as we think of, as you consider it, as you consider what your recommendation to council is, it may not just be about the implementation plan of this. It may be about how do they look at governance structure, and whether it's about climate or not, and that some good, in a good way, some dust was kicked up in this discussion on that subject. And so, and my second thought was something for you to think about is you could ask Melanie to adjust some of the language in here. You're also welcome to, as many committees have done in the past, if you would like to consider a sort of an accompanying resolution to the council and say, that says something on this subject that maybe is related to, but isn't core to the climate action plan, but is about equity. You could say, you know, we kicked up some dust in this subject. We're proud to have kicked up dust. And also it was really challenging, and you know, we would like you to think about this subject, both for implementation and beyond. Something just to consider about how you might want to do it. And I'd be happy to talk to meet with any subset of the group to think about pros and cons and approaches.
Have you defined the categories of people you're in? Are you talking about the indigenous people? Yeah, I mean,
Well,
Are you
they have,
talking
if you
about-
look at,
Black people? Are you
Yeah.
talking about people with low incomes?
So Roseanne. people-
Roseanne, it's in
cities-
the report.
It's in the, cities have gone through this systematically,
Okay, so.
and I would say that it is not just social and demographic.
Okay,
It is financial, it is geographic. So people have looked at this in many different lenses.
so you know who,
So if you just gravitate towards race and gender, I don't think it's gonna resonate. You have to look at beyond that.
all right, okay.
Well, and I think, right, and to our own community,
Yeah.
from my perspective,
Yes.
it's those whose voice is not as evenly heard as other people's
Sure.
voice in the decision
Sure.
making process. So I can look around in our community and say, we're 30 to 40% renters in
Yeah.
our population. Our renters are probably not fully represented in our decision making process at that same level as a for
Sure.
instance.
I agree.
That is correlated to economics, but not necessarily about economics or age.
Yeah,
Older people,
Yeah.
younger people are less represented,
Yeah.
gender, all sorts of groups.
You can see many of these distinctions emerge if you work at the polls,
Mhm.
because we see a broad cross-section of folks come out to vote.
huh,
And we can see with our eyes and hear with our ears
sure.
some of those variations and
Yep.
multiplicity of
So Paul, I think just to add on to what you just said, so you really think that we need a recommendation from this group to get the attention of the city council?
I'm not saying you need to, I'm just hearing that you're feeling like more than what has been done to date should be done by the end of this, and I'm giving an idea
I
as
see.
a way. I said you could also say that you're very happy with what Melanie and Ann wrote, you could ask them to tweak, but if you felt like something more should be said,
I see.
I'm just giving you an outside the box idea
Okay,
that may not have been discussed before tonight.
Well, it's applicable to every project that's gonna come down in the city, whether it's
Yeah.
this or energy or something else.
Yeah.
Water use, whatever.
It is what I was hoping for, is a recommendation, is to have a recommendation in here
yeah,
about that. But I didn't know people wanted to go that far. Anyway, I'll think about it and see if I can come up with some language, and I will send you some things for the references of how other cities have done it.
Just to push this a little bit further, Darrellin, similar to other conversations where you've encouraged or authorized Andrew to work on an ordinance or so on and so forth. Do you want to get a little bit of a temperature of the group to say, do you want Darrellin to work on this?
Do you want me to go away? Are you happy with that? It's all right. I won't
Go
have,
away.
I won't have bad feelings.
So-
I mean, it's fair.
so I'm happy to help Darlene on this. Darlene, if you're interested in.
Sure.
Yeah,
How
I'm
does
happy
the
to help
chair
you.
feel about this? Do
Yeah.
you want me to?
I think we need to do something to make sure that no one coming after us looks at the table and says, look, there's an equity column that must have been solved already. And doesn't sort of hear the concern in these conversations coming through that how much
Yeah.
more work is needed.
Yeah.
So I think that particularly given that, you know, of the feedback that we've been seeing in the last few days, there were multiple people who highlighted very, very strongly that they felt like the generic concerns that, you know, are expressed in there about consider equity were not really going to be enough to see it shine through in implementation. So yeah, I think this is a great step. I wish in some ways we could do more, but I think this is at least improving the chances that it will be treated with more depth in the next round. So Chris, I know you've raised, oh, actually, wait, let me pause before I go on there. So was the question, or Paul, was part of your question about do we need the task force to formally make a motion to empower
I don't think it was a
Darlene and
motion, I
Bree?
just wanted to, I think Darrellin had said, I'm happy to go off and do that, and I think that you've had a successful model in the past where you've had sort of a thumbs up of, yes, please do that, we're looking forward to seeing it the next meeting, to sort of prep you for
Good.
I
Yes.
see.
And if that's what
actually.
people
see.
want,
Yeah.
we will work on that and maybe run it by you too.
I think
Yeah,
Melanie,
so if,
I just had a clarifying statement, because the first paragraph on page 7 is the climate action plan's task force recommendation to the city to address equity. Maybe it's not as strong as you would like, and I'm also willing to hear some additional language that you want to put in there, but the equity recommendation for the climate action plan is to consider equity going forward.
I understand that, but I think this was in place 3 months ago, though, two months ago. I mean, nothing has changed. And what we are saying is we need a more stronger case to appeal to the city council.
Okay.
I think that's what Paul is articulating.
I'm not really understanding that. I mean, because this is all in the details, right? So take the carbon-free ordinance. Obviously, we need to ensure that the impact is equitable. But until you dig into the details of that, you don't know. And so I don't know how we do that work now at this stage of planning, as opposed to say, as we have said, as you look at each of these actions and go forth and implement, make sure you pay attention to the details and equity.
I just think that if you don't pay attention now and if you don't urge the city council, it will get kicked further down the road. Let's do what other cities have done. I mean, why ignore best practices from other cities?
What additional thing do you think we need to do right now?
No, I'm not saying right now. I'm
No, we're
asking.
saying it's the implementation. As this
the
goes.
implementation. So we
Well,
are,
let us try to write something.
let's not reverse something that we
Yeah.
already, agreed on, so.
Yeah, I get that. I just wanted to clarify that, there's a statement in here that.
No, I
is
did read that. I
encouraging-
read that several times,
Yeah.
saying, it's not enough. Are you okay? Can you be quiet about this? And I said,
Okay, thanks. Okay.
Chris, I know you've had your hand up, but Donna, as a member of the task force, I want to give a chance to speak here.
okay, we'll try.
Oh, here, I'm there. Hi, I just wanted to make sure that I was able to weigh in that I do think that Darrellin we do need to be much more specific about equity issues in the report. And yeah, I think it would be great if Darrellin could do that in combination with
Srini and.
Srini, and I'll be back in a couple of days. So I'm happy to jump in then.
Great.
Yep. Hello from Prince Edward Island.
All right.
The only place in North America that makes Vermont seem like a big place.
Oh, I see.
And a warm
Yeah.
place.
Yep. Yeah, it's quite warm here today. Very similar to Burlington in many ways too. It's kind of amazing. But yeah, so I'm here, I'm listening, and I never tried to do this on the phone before, but it seems to work. So,
We got you loud and clear. Thanks, Donna. Glad you're able to
Okay.
participate. Chris, did you have a comment on this topic that you wanted to make?
Yeah, I'm not gonna reread the letter in its totality. But I think the gist of what we were trying to say is that we agree with the concepts that were mentioned about equity and addressing those and involving people, and it says all the right things. What what the difference seems to be is that it's part two of an action. Like, so you're proposing an action and then asking per the charter that this is going to go to the city council. City council will then adopt and accept that action plan, and then we're going to ask the city staff to implement that plan. And so when we say in the action plan, that we want to see an equity committee help implement that. Are we saying that we're asking them to implement something that already has that inequity baked in? Or maybe it doesn't have an inequity, there's some reasonable accommodations that could be made. It's just really kind of understanding that the way it reads in the charter is that you're asking the city council to adopt your plan. And so if that plan is inherently does not make those accommodations as identified by CCRPC, what is the expectation of the equity committee? What I think really what we're trying to say is that process needs to happen first before you go through and recommend that action. And it doesn't have to be this robust, complex process. The Just Transition website outlines a terrific question and answer. And it's a relatively easy exercise that the committee could perform. It's just really kind of being sensitive, like who are the losers in this scenario, and what are some accommodations to make. It would be amazing to hear from each of the members tonight. Kind of on the equity piece. I hear Darren speaking, I hear Srini speaking, but I'm not hearing from other members. And where do you stand on this? Because if we're going to implement something, just how do we make those accommodations up front without kind of it was interesting with the building ordinance, that was I think Darren mentioned, we're moving that forward and we're looking to adopt that, but there wasn't a talk about accommodations. And what's 2 months to do that exercise? I guess what's the timeline push that we got to get it done by the state? So that's it for now, but thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And I mean, I think what you're describing is really the ideal scenario that we came into this with, right? We read the plan from the Vermont Climate Council and the recommendations that equity be considered first, and we looked at the steps for considering equity. And I don't know that I can explain through specific concrete examples of each of the 100+ measures that we've got in there. Why it became so overwhelming, but frankly, I do remember that when we went to look through what is the information we need in order to answer the questions, it wasn't something that we felt we could readily answer, and we weren't sure where to go for it. And I think part of what you may be seeing here is that this task force was assembled around climate, right? Each of us volunteered and is here because of our interest in climate, and that's the background and the expertise, or at least the research that we've been doing. While obviously there are people here who are bringing a lot from the equity perspective, Darren in particular, coming from affordable housing, I think we didn't have the kind of expertise that would allow us to tackle it early on, and the urgency around the timing is about the budget for South Burlington, right? So the council is going to start to make the budget in September. And if we don't have a plan in front of them, then we're looking at, fiscal 24 instead of fiscal 23 that this plan is relevant to. So, 2030 is not very far away, and these goals are incredibly ambitious. They would have been hard to hit if we started 10 years ago. So every year later is a concern for us. I don't mean that to sound like we think we can easily patch in equity at the last minute and it'll work. And I just as an aside, this is making me think of if any of you are familiar with Beth Solwin from the Sustainability Institute in Heartland, Vermont, has a concept called multi-solving. And the concept is, instead of tackling one problem and then trying to minimize the other problems that are created around it, that you sort of assemble all the problems that matter to you and then look for the solution that optimizes for all of them. Not to sound like that's a trivial thing to do, but I think she's got some resources on that we could look into. But yeah, I wish I shared your confidence that this is an easy thing that we could have done, because it came up in multiple meetings early on, and every time we looked at it, we felt like we really weren't equipped to do it without sacrificing the core task that we've been given to come up with a solution to the climate goals. So that was our pickle.
No, I don't think, I think everybody sort of wanted to do it in the back of their minds, but there were so many tasks just to get to where we are. I mean, all of the measurements, etc., and then going through all of the pathways. And this was a very large assignment for a group of people in what I think is a short period of time, given the size of the task. So I'm not saying, I think I think this report looks really good,
Yeah,
but that's just that one thing that I would like to us just to contemplate a little more. And it may be that Srini and I can't come and Donna can't, but let's just give it a shot.
Chris, does that answer your question?
I understand the time constraint, and we want to allow perfection to be the enemy here to move something forward. And there's a lot of good here. There's a lot of good here, and so it's still not clear what the expectation is if you hand this off to an equity committee. What do you expect to be done to make it an accommodation, so that when it's implemented, it's either, what if they came back and said, hey, this just doesn't make sense. We can't come up with an accommodation. It requires money, or they have a recommendation. How would that get baked back in? Because from what I understand from the charter, it's we shall adopt the actions. So it's just not clear what value added the equity committee would have if those accommodations were recommended, and how they would be reconciled with the original intent of the climate action plan.
yeah.
We're
Well,
not
I
gonna
think
have
this,
an
I
equity
think this,
committee.
I mean, I think this,
That could be one way of
Yeah.
ensuring that equity is baked into all
Yeah,
actions and policies of the city council.
well, okay.
Well,
But it's not gonna
I think
happen.
just to sort of speak to that point, and the community hasn't wrestled with these subjects a lot historically. Various committees have talked about it in various projects. But the fact that here we're talking about what's the best way to tackle
Sure.
it is indicative that there's a lot of hard work on how to do it properly in our community and bake it in. And I think that's, to me, the sort of largest point about all of this.
Okay.
But I mean, that's just my view. Others.
So can I say
Yes, go ahead.
something? Can I say something to kind of articulate the challenge and difficulty around what Chris commented on? Look, at the end of the day, all of us have spent a significant amount of our personal time to get to this point. I mean, this is nothing like any other committee that I've been involved in. This is nothing like, there's a lot of hard work that has gone in. And to get to this point, the role that CCRPC played in bringing all the content together in a cohesive form in such a short time frame is fantastic work. Having said that, the economic impact, the equity impact is all considerations that you need to work on. It's just that the volume of the work has not allowed us to think about those things. You just have to, believe me, the climate change plan is nothing like what the city council has encountered before. This is all new territory for all city managers, all city leadership. Every city has to figure it out. There is no magic wand here that says that if you do this and this and this, and you end up with a bunch of actions and you'll get there. This is a long marathon. You have to systematically go at it, and you have to be very comprehensive. There is no single solution here. So I would say for the people who are outside, give some time, allow some patience here. And it's going to take time to develop this plan, to a meaningful implementation plan. I don't think we're ignoring, what the community is asking. It's just that it's impossible to do all this work in the timeline that has been outlined.
Let me repeat my perspective, because I just don't really agree with everything that's being said. I think we have thought about it, and the conclusion is the devil's in the details. And when we get to each action, we have to analyze the current state. The Inflation Reduction Act just changed things dramatically. When we talk about incentives for a lot of these things, that just happened. And so when you get to each action, you need to take into account all the considerations in the detail of what you're doing. It's not that we ran out of time, it's that you can't do it at this stage.
I'm not saying we should do that. Andrew, you're not hearing me. I'm saying that in the timeline, you cannot do equity assessment. You cannot do economic assessment in this current timeline. Did you hear that? In this timeline, we cannot
I
do
just don't
equity
think you can't do it at
assessment.
this stage, but okay. maybe
I'm
that's-
just
we have a
saying,
different perspective.
just don't change what I said. I'm communicating a practical implication of getting things done. It's what it is. We have to do, somebody has to do more work to figure this out.
Yeah, I mean, I there's no easy answer here, right? Like, if we had an easy answer of like, well, we can just fix the equity now and still get things done on time, we'd do it. We could pull the brake and say, let's stop the whole schedule and redo it. I don't think that's in the best interests of the climate goals for the city. I think there's still an opportunity to get some benefit from the content that we have ready on the deadline that we were asked to meet. And I'm not terribly interested in spending a lot of time second guessing what we did do over the last year. I mean, it's not a bad thing to do a debrief at some point, and we can, think about how we could have done something differently next time. But I don't see anything that really indicts the work that we've done and makes me think that we should consider not publishing it. So I feel like if we have another suggestion for how we can do something more robust and concrete within the constraints that we have, I'm open to it. Otherwise, I think we should do everything we can at this step to make sure that the significant work in the implementation planning phase is able to go further on this and learn from what we've observed and go further on the equity considerations. And it's not the perfect answer, but at this point, it feels like the best answer that we have, and I think it's I think it meets what we've been asked to do, and I think it still gives us the opportunity to achieve something that will not be doing harm to the town. I don't think we passed that point where we're already committed to things that are impacting people that we've been attempting not to impact. So I'm going to stay optimistic on that point, I guess, but I'll open it up, and if anyone on the task force strongly feels that we're going to miss the boat and we should pull the brake cord, this would be the time.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Can I just,
Well,
may I ask just one more kind of closing, and
Sure.
if it's okay with you, Chair?
sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So Srini makes an excellent point. Like, what's expected with the timeline that you're given. There's a deep dive. What I'm still not hearing is that there's a commitment that what is the expectation to the Eco Committee that was recommended in the draft plan to do if that modifies or amends or asks for an accommodation or a carve out that reduces the original draft action plan. So let's say, I'm here because of affordable housing, and I think that was clear in our letter here. And so I think everyone in the room says, yeah, okay, we understand that CCRPC identified that there's an equity concern. We're going to ask that another committee works on that, but there's not a clear definition of how that work would be adopted to amend the plan. A terrific resource to come up with some maybe some upfront accommodations is CCRPC. They're a terrific group, and they know because they identified the equity, if there should be a carve out, or if there's an area that maybe it's not ready for prime time because it was listed as having high equity concerns. It's at the end of the day, we're asking the lower income residents or potential future lower income residents of South Burlington to live to a higher standard than some other folks in South Burlington, or reduce those opportunities for them in the future. It just, at the end of the day, it doesn't feel right. Acknowledging that there wasn't enough time to address it and just moving it forward, I don't know, it doesn't sit right. And I don't think anybody in the room feels that it should be ignored. It's just there's not a pathway to make sure that that happens and it's adopted.
Well, I think that-
And
I
that's
think
it.
that-
Well, I won't continue the debate, but I think you kind of get where we're going.
Yeah,
Thanks
and I just want to clarify. No, I appreciate that comment, Chris. I mean, I just want to clarify. I don't think what we are trying to say is that we ran out of time and it was too hard and it's just not going to get done. So much as that the place that we think it can best get done, certainly where we stand today, is in the implementation plan, where some of the details for the actual financing and what kind of exceptions would be made, what kind of support is available, and the details that actually will ultimately determine what those costs are actually going to be hashed out. So you know, I don't think our message hopefully is well, no, it is what it is, so much as that, you know, we still have an opportunity to do this. And I also want to clarify, I don't think our recommendation here is that we have an equity committee, and the
Right.
equity committee and the climate committee,
That's right.
you know, debate each other and try to see which one gets to win. The idea is that we try to find a way to bring equity onto the implementation committee so that we can find a collaborative solution that gets us to the goals with those considerations intact. So I just want to be clear about that. Paul?
Related to that, I wonder if either in the work that Darren's gonna look at, or possibly in your motion of when you submit ultimately this plan to council. Andrew gave an illustration a few minutes ago of something that changed dramatically in the last 3 weeks with the Inflation Reduction Act.
Right.
I can promise, I think we can all promise, that this is such an evolving subject. The community will need to be nimble on both how we implement and what the tools for implementation become. A year from now, we may say, wow, there is this additional tool that we
Sure.
all missed. And I think the idea that this is not a document that is put into cast iron and is never to be touched again. This is, if we're gonna meet any of the targets identified, we're gonna have to be a really nimble organization over several years, and maybe that can be part of the transmittal. And I think, Chris, your point is, you're concerned that something fundamental to the plan will have determined to be inequitable. And I think, to me, that sort of comes into this of, if there's an approach that needs to be relooked at, that's part of being nimble, is not just implementing the specific things, but implementing in a broad sense. So that would be my suggestion, is to also, you know, invite council to think about this as a living document
Yeah.
as well.
The only other comment I would make is, in terms of a process, think of this as a baseline plan. This baseline plans needs to be adopted, modified, categorized into whatever efficiency methods be implemented. So this is just a baseline plan. It's gonna go through multiple revisions based on all this work, the assessment the city is gonna do. So yeah, I agree with you, Paul. It's not something that is cast in stone, so.
And not the first time we wish there was an easy answer for this. And I do hope we can look back at some point and reflect that, you know, it's all worth it, and hopefully we're able to find solutions to these challenges. I also don't think we're alone among communities around the US and the world who are struggling with the same challenge. So I really appreciate that folks are here showing up and supporting the need to continue to do better. And I hope you continue to be here to support us and help us think about how to actually, you know, craft these policies in a way that, you know, bridges that difficult balance. So thank you. So I'd like to move on from this with thanks for Darren and Srini and Donna for working on that revision. And so what's next on our agenda? Are we looking at the revisions to the plan now? I know we're somewhat behind schedule here, and it might be worth taking a quick look at the agenda to see if we need to shuffle anything, but I know that we have a deadline for getting the climate action plan out, and so it's probably the next top priority still to get a review of the changes since the last time it was presented, Melanie. And do you want to lead us in what's the most productive way to use this time to get feedback on the current state of the document?
Sure. So in the draft that was circulated into your packet,
Yeah.
the major changes were shown in red.
Right.
And we did that especially for the actions in each sector page. So I think it would be good to say, whether the Climate Action Plan Task Force accepts those changes to the actions. I believe all the other changes that were made were more clarifications and responded to comments that we heard at the last meeting.
Right.
So I don't necessarily think those require a lot of discussion.
Mm.
I think the most important thing is to look at the individual sectors, focus on the actions and say, whether folks are okay with the language that was added to those actions, or are they okay with the actions that were added. And I just want to say, unfortunately, I have a black and white copy, so I might have to ask from them. Just tell me which bullet you are referring to.
So are you suggesting that we go look at each of these pages and give you comments, or are you just?
I
want
mean,
to
I
just-
think we've done that. I think we've gone through the plan with a fine tooth comb, and the last time we met, we went page by page and have gotten comments
Okay.
from people individually. So, and because we voted on the actions and, you know,
Sure.
when we were reviewing them
Sure.
at each sector, they've changed to respond to comments that we've heard. So I just want to
Okay.
get, you know, yes or no, are
Yeah.
the actions okay as edited and written in the plan?
I just have a bunch of cosmetic or clarifying comments. Should I just send them to you by email?
Yeah, that would be best.
Yeah.
I do too. and
Yeah,
I'll
I
just
have a
email
bunch of them. I have a whole bunch of them.
So I think for the purpose, at the committee, at the task force level, I think
Yeah.
there's maybe two questions.
Yeah.
One, does anybody have items that they disagree with the edits that Melanie has made? And two, in your reading and your talking in the community in the last 2 months, has Melanie and Ann missed something?
Yeah.
I think those are the key questions at the policy level, and then please send individual.
Yes.
We have something about a tree ordinance that was, we did.
There was something,
We don't.
it didn't say tree ordinance.
I don't know if we do, because there's a lot of actions in there, but we did hear a comment earlier in the meeting to add something, so.
We should have. a tree
Um,
ordinance.
Yeah.
if everybody is okay with adding an action that encourages, you know, adoption of a tree ordinance, that we can add that action for
Sure.
the next time
Sure.
around.
Sure,
Sure.
sure.
What I'm sorry, what's the what is the tree ordinance?
An ordinance about removing trees, that's what I
You have
had
to get
written down when I
permission.
think Sarah wrote it. In the next version of the plan, we can add some language about that in red, so you can see how that action develops, but I mean, if folks are okay with sort of the intent of that kind of action.
I'm sorry, I'm still not following that. You would, is this suggesting that you would need to get some kind of a permit from the city to remove a tree? Is that what? I'm just not, maybe I'm
Yes,
forgetting. the
well, yeah,
discussion, so-
many municipalities have something like that. The town I moved from has something like that. So I believe, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, actually, the Natural Resource Committee has already been tasked to do
Yeah.
a survey of best practices around the country in terms of tree ordinance. But that would be the gist of it, yes.
You're talking about encouraging the adoption of a tree ordinance, right? I mean, that's,
Yeah, just to
Yeah.
supplement what's already happening.
Can I ask, sorry, go ahead, Srini. Yes, Srini, did you have something?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
so on the changes that you made with red, right, I'm just gonna comment on those. On the buildings and thermal, we have a target that is based on how much of the homes we are going to electrify in the top section.
Mhm.
And then in the bottom, since 2019, we have number of heat pumps installed. So I wonder whether we should have the tracking metric consistent with the target instead of heat pumps. Is there a way to say how many homes? No.
We don't have that data.
Okay, all right. So I can ignore that. In the renewable energy section, there is a new action on develop materials to educate homeowners association on the right to install rooftop solar. Right?
Mhm.
I thought this was more than education. I thought this, hey, homeowner, from the discussion that happened at the community meeting,
Mhm.
I was left with the impression that the homeowners association were getting away with something. And we needed to fix that. So it sounded more like an education than fixing
They don't know
something.
what the state law is, so
Yeah.
they're telling their member
Yeah,
person, oh, you can't do that.
yeah. So is my understanding not correct? Isn't that more than education? Isn't that like trying to regulate something or specify something?
So this is, I don't know a ton about this subject, but reading the state law, it appears that members of a homeowners association have the right
Yeah.
to do these things, regardless of what the homeowners association might see. If somebody is not obeying that, I don't think it's our authority at the city to do something about that, unfortunately, because it's not our law, it's a state law.
Okay,
So I think the most that we can do as a municipality
okay,
and as a community is to educate about what the state law is in this case.
okay.
I mean, I suppose if we wanted to go one step further, I'm not sure if this is possible to resource or appropriate or useful, is you could offer some kind of free legal aid for individual homeowners to sue their homeowners association under that law. But that seems like something that might be a lot of work to stand up, and there's already Vermont Legal Aid, which helps with things like that.
Okay, all right. I just want to make sure that it had the impact it could have with the action, so, okay. There was somewhere, there was a couple of areas where there was a suggestion around renewable natural gas. And is it still in the comment section or has it made it to the actions list?
What specifically about renewable natural gas are you
Well,
talking about?
Ann, Ethan and I had a follow-up email exchange based on a suggestion that came from the Economic Development Committee. Apparently Vermont Gas is aspiring to increase supply up to 20%.
Yeah, that sounds correct. Yes, they have a climate action plan
Yeah.
to make a portion of their
Yeah,
portfolio renewable natural gas. And is there?
yeah, I wasn't sure whether it was still in that spreadsheet list or whether it had made it to the actions list.
I don't know that there's a specific action that the city can do around that because
Okay.
it's utility. I mean, it's more about information that,
Okay, okay,
if, as Vermont gas becomes more renewable, it could help the emission profile in South Burlington.
okay.
And so it is talked about. I know in the business as usual discussion of the scenarios and that being an external policy, but
Yeah.
that it isn't modeled.
Yeah,
We can certainly add some
Okay.
more narrative in the buildings and thermal.
I
about
will
it.
point out that in the ordinance for new construction fossil fuel regulation, that one of the pathways to compliance was to procure a lifetime contract for renewable natural gas. So if someone wants to avoid putting in a heat pump and wants to put in a gas system instead, they can, as long as they commit to buying
okay.
only renewable, 100% renewable natural gas. That's one possible pathway to compliance.
Yes, it's on page 25. VGS's plan to add 20% renewable natural gas to their portfolio. By
Okay,
2030 is an existing policy that was not modeled, but could play a role in reducing GHG emissions from natural gas fuel usage.
okay, got it. Okay, I didn't quite pick up that comment there, so that's good.
But it
They
could
could-
also be added to buildings and thermal.
Yeah,
Instead
okay,
of-
But
just
just to
buried
be
in
clear,
ground.
right now, I think VGS is only, I'm gonna say delivering, even though it's not quite the right term. They're only selling the renewable natural gas to people who request it. So it isn't that 20% of every
I see.
South Burlington customer will get it. Some will get 50, some will get 80%, some will get 100%, most will get 0%.
I see.
Okay, Vermont as a
A
whole
lot.
will benefit, I see, okay. I just wanted to pick up on one comment that Keith Epstein had suggested. So he pointed out, I mean, he's got a lot of good comments, so just a process question. Is there an intent to incorporate any of those comments in the plan or just leave them where they are?
Do you mean his specifically or?
Not
all of them?
specific- in general, I'm just asking a general question. There's some good ideas out there that came from the community.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a question for you all.
Okay.
Oftentimes plans are written just as the plan, but
Okay,
federal plans include every single comment that anybody's ever made. So
okay.
I guess that's up to you. It's not a
Okay.
huge amount of work for us to attach these
Okay.
things. I might remove the individuals because they might not have expected that they would be part of a plan forever into the future, that the people, but the statements can be,
Okay,
if you like, as sort of a second appendix to say, here's all the public feedback we got.
I mean, if we did that, would we also include the poll responses and all the letters that we got from the college students in the spring? Be a long appendix, but I mean,
But I think we need to do better than that. I mean, merely sharing the comments in appendix, I mean.
Without incorporating.
I think somehow we need to take the time to go through material comments and see what we think about it.
Well, and I think that was my
Yeah,
second
wasn't
question.
it?
So
Okay.
Melanie
Yeah.
and Ann, did you have the
We have
questions?
done that.
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, so the very specific comments that we've gotten from Keith, that we got from
Yeah.
Roseanne,
okay,
we have addressed them in this version.
okay,
And we have a running spreadsheet that
okay,
summarizes
okay,
all the comments that we received and also talks about how we address them.
okay.
But if there's a specific comment
There
that
is like, yeah, there's like 3 or 4 emails that have come in the last couple
Right,
of
so
weeks.
so I think the question for you all is Melanie and Ann have taken their best shot at incorporating
Okay, okay,
to the sense of where they think the committee wanted to be. Obviously,
Okay.
not every single comment
okay,
was automatically just put in
Okay.
regardless of where it is.
yeah,
Right.
But your job is to identify, did they hit the mark on that? Did they miss some? Did they
Okay.
overstate some? That's your job.
so the only concept I wanted to pick up from Keith, I think this is an excellent suggestion, is he's pointing out the aspect of the need for regional collaboration in this plan. A lot of these things that we are outlining, South Burlington cannot do this on their own. So he's highlighting, I don't know, maybe we need to acknowledge, I don't know, being from CCRP, you probably have a better view on this, and I was just gonna ask the question, is there a way to kind of contextually say, these aspects of the plan, need regional coordination or implementation type leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I think the implementation of some of the transportation actions. We work
Okay.
with CATMA, we work with,
Okay,
the vendor of the bike share and, we work with GMT on
okay,
similar policy trajectories of reducing vehicle miles traveled. We're more at the 50,000-foot view and this plan is
You can make
more
whatever noise
specific
you want.
to South Burlington. And then also around
The
land.
video, put the volume on.
okay, thank you.
And then, specifically around land use and housing that we want to see, our policy is to have, housing in our areas planned for growth where we have sewer and water infrastructure to maintain, the working landscapes in our rural communities.
Yeah.
So, we are working hand in hand on similar
Okay,
policies, but the actual implementation lies with South Burlington.
Apart from Burlington, is there anyone else in Chittenden County developing a climate action plan?
Underhill is either
Okay.
starting work or considering it.
Okay,
Also, a majority of municipalities have enhanced energy plans, which do, in my mind, very similar things and provide support for
Okay.
the community to do things like a heating or, a carbon-free heating ordinance to reduce
okay,
fossil fuels in the heating sector and encouraging more EVs.
okay,
A lot of the enhanced energy plans are based on the Department of Public Services energy planning standards, and they don't go as far as quantifying things in terms of carbon, but the policies are similar. South Burlington's climate action plan is a little bit more specific, because we weren't sort of beholden to the planning standards. We could be a little bit more creative, but I think that, municipalities in Chittenden County, they also have similar documents, but it's just in the form of enhanced energy planning.
You had a list of all the towns that have.
I think-
Yeah.
Yeah, Burlington.
Yeah, so
yeah.
Burlington had one, Underhill, I think, is considering it, and we've been hearing requests from municipalities to do climate action plans, and our guidance to them is, if you have an enhanced energy plan, you can do a lot of the work.
okay,
And, a lot of the thinking that South Burlington is already doing with those
Okay.
enhanced energy plans.
good. All the cosmetic changes, I'll send you an email, but the major issues, that's all I had. So thanks, excellent,
Yeah.
great work, thank you.
So going through the comments, a lot of people focused on transportation, obviously, and they talked about electric bikes. Talked about maybe restricting the use of our roadways, or limiting roadways, like, for 2-lane roadways, make it single lane and have the other lane be for bikes. So I don't know if we've captured all the passion around some of the transportation suggestions in the feedback we got, both on electric bikes and really focus on bike paths and restrict some of the
And also
car-centric
the
infrastructure.
safety,
Protected by. that.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to be passionate, like a comment to a survey in a plan like this. So there is an action that says create a walk bike master plan.
Right.
Yeah,
And, it does consider safety. So when I read through all the respondents from the climate survey, I felt like it was very affirming. I felt like they're,
but should we say something like, consider restricting car traffic on certain roads as an affirmative thing?
oh.
So,
Make some of the roads one lane.
well,
No,
so
ask them like all that's-
let me
Lots of
let me
cities are
pick up
doing
on
it,
what
and
Andrew's saying here.
people love it.
Burlington's doing that.
What's that?
So in the transportation part of the plan, there's two big things, right? Go electric vehicles and reduce vehicle miles by 2.5% each year. The 2.5% each year is a monumental task to do.
It is.
I think what you're maybe saying, you're giving a specific example, but as a broad statement, in the buildings and thermal sector, you've acknowledged that there's carrots and there's sticks, right? In the transportation sector, a lot of the focus has been on the carrots side.
Yeah.
What we know from practice, though it is politically very uncomfortable, is the way to get change, just like in the building sector, is on the stick side. One of the sticks that we can do is to make it less comfortable to drive. I understand how politically messy that is, but that is, if that's the goal, and you've, all along said, don't let things that are hard be an obstacle,
I would personally be in favor.
that is sort of the,
Obviously, we need to talk about it.
So does
I
that
think we
include
should.
not paving roads that need it?
Yeah,
no, it might be, well, I mean,
yeah, why not?
8 or 10
Seriously.
years ago, Williston Road east of Heinsberg Road is 4-lane road.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah,
reduced
yeah.
to add bike lanes, and also it slowed traffic.
Yeah.
And there was a, not massive, but a side effect of people who wanted to drive through had a little bit more difficulty.
Yeah,
That is something that can be
yeah.
considered over and over, whether it's a small thing like an intersection is a little tighter. There was a recommendation that the Bike Ped Committee, for example, just approved to extend the bike lanes through the Kennedy Drive intersection when you're on Williston Road. They end before you get there. In order to do that, you have to take a turn lane out, it does slow traffic. Like, it will take longer to get through that intersection.
Oh, God.
As a driver, those are choices that we make.
People are gonna love that.
But these
Cutting-
are
cutting-
important-
I
cutting
know, I
parking.
agree. I think it, yeah.
These are important things to talk about, important
So-
choices.
So,
Lots
so
of-
in a
lots of
broad
tons of
sense,
dollars.
that might be what you're identifying as sort of the stick side of it.
That's.
And stick doesn't necessarily mean regulations, it might be
Said
investing
it
to
better than
narrow.
I said it.
But-
You know,
but to
we all
get
know
to
that
the-
Nolan Farm Road is a massively wide road. It would be a huge investment to narrow it. That one might not reduce vehicle miles, but it might entice.
People to be slower. I mean, you can take a chunk of that road and make it into a bike path.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
If you want people to ride bikes, you
Right,
guys.
Tom
Yeah,
has
can
got
I
a-
make a-
a
Yeah,
comment
I'd
in
like
here.
to make a comment here, because I think you're forgetting that the biggest way that cities are able to reduce car traffic is by reducing parking. And one of the huge examples, I know when, the planning for the new, for a new high school and middle school, I kept saying, it's like, why do you need this much parking? If you reduce the amount of parking, you won't have as many people driving to school. And everybody just blew it off. And I think the city has a real capacity to reduce parking standards. And, I think that needs to be part of the plan. And,
I'm gonna toot the city's horn and already say, we've eliminated parking minimums citywide.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
That's done. Now, the next part of that question, which is contemplated in the plan, is does the city go to the next step, which is a maximum, which is a much more politically challenging
Right.
subject, but
Mm.
I will toot our horn on that one as a community.
It's very controversial.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
Look, I'm happy for the restrict roadway to be considered rather than a shall, but we should.
or just restrict car traffic from certain streets.
I mean,
There's many cities who have done this particularly in downtown areas, where they just say only local car traffic is allowed, no through traffic. And, they put up barriers that you have to have special access to drive in certain areas. And, South Burlington's not exactly ideal for that.
We've got a few of them.
But there are places that could be done, to eliminate cut through traffic. Any streets where people take shortcuts through, and it may be a convenience for some people, but it makes life more difficult for those people who live on those streets. And I think there's all kinds of things that we really haven't put in there, because we're afraid of people's reaction to it. But you have to start the conversation by proposing it.
so can I ask like a more general question? And I'm afraid of getting too far down this path at sort of the 11th hour for this report, but I feel like this is emblematic of a lot of the things that we've gone through, where there's a lot of great brainstorming ideas that we've put onto the list of possible actions in the plan that ultimately I think will be read and get a lot of hms and ha's from city councilors and other folks and staff, and then life moves on, right? And the goal of 2.5% VMT reduction per year, as Paul points out, is a really aggressive goal. And I think that if we could find mechanisms to, for example, get the city to report out annually on the actual reductions in VMT and make some, explicit plans for how they're going to make up for any shortfalls or something like that, right? Because we could sit here all night and talk about like, what about this lane? What about that parking spot? What about this type of timing on a light, right? We can go on and on about that stuff. But ultimately, like, those decisions are going to be made by folks looking at a whole bunch of other information, right? Professionals who are doing the planning for the city, right? And I'm just trying to figure out like, what is the actual leverage point that we think we have? Giving them more tools may be less important than asking them to report out on it, or I don't know, that going back to the master plan thing. What do folks think about that strategy rather than the laundry list?
We should definitely talk about monitoring, but I thought we were gonna try and go through the comments first that we got. I totally agree with you. Monitoring is really important, but shouldn't we just finish going through the public comments? Because I think we owe it to the public to do that.
I thought, I was just trying to get us back from, we were going into brainstorming mode again and.
No,
asking if
I'm
we
only,
could-
I mean, we're doing brainstorming because I pointed out some comments from the public that I think are important that we should reflect on. And I think we owe it to the public to go through that process. I mean, there's a lot of work here, right? And a lot of people commented.
So Andrew, I know you like specifics, so there's a specific strategy in here that says, create a bike walk master plan, recommend investments in retrofits and infrastructure, including widening or narrowing where needed, and consideration of making bike ped infrastructure safer. Maybe there's a statement in there that could be saying, talk about, looking at prioritizing investments that reinforce the reduction in vehicle usage.
And I
Like
would
in
say-
amongst that, not just
I
about
agree
safety,
with that,
but
that's a good
priority.
place, but I would specifically say, consider restricting, car traffic and car lanes, just like,
Well, and
throw it out there.
Right, I was.
I know, you
guess
wanted
I
to
would
say more generic way.
investments and
know.
investments that prioritize other modes, I guess was what I was
I-
suggesting, but
I-
however you want to do it, I'm just trying to get.
I
some
understand what
specific-
you'd like to say
because I
there.
know you
I
like specifics.
personally want to say a stronger statement, but I mean.
Yeah. So isn't the intent here to improve the bike and other forms of transportation infrastructure, improve them to the point where you discourage car traffic, right?
Mhm.
You're not saying if I'm just gonna restrict car traffic down this lane, people are gonna find a way to drive around it and still add miles. So I think the constructive intent here is change the mode of access to reduce car usage, I think.
No, but
Just-
the example is
incentivize
if you
bikes,
have
right?
like
Yeah.
Dorset with 2 lanes.
Yeah.
Right, or Kennedy with 2 lanes of cars. Take one of those lanes and make
Yeah.
it solely for bikes,
Yes.
because it'd be safe. You
Yeah.
could put up barriers so that people know they're safe. And so they did in Washington DC, they've done in lots of other cities.
Mhm.
I know when I went to DC, my whole family were biking everywhere because it was safe, and they took a whole bunch of roadways and converted them to bikes.
Or even Burlington's done it.
Burlington's doing it.
So I think you should personally make a strong statement in that regard.
As a public, I agree. As somebody who would love to ride her bike more,
And be safe.
it's just too dangerous the way
Yes.
it is now.
Yeah.
And if you want to really reduce carbon emissions and you want people to get out and use non-carbon modes of transportation, bikes are the way to do it, but it's not safe right now.
So let me give a concrete example and maybe this will help us to get to some language. A couple of years ago, we were looking at a proposed neighborhood, and part of the proposal was to widen an intersection to accommodate the more transportation needs of this neighborhood. And we encouraged them to look to the transportation study that we'd recently done and said, transportation engineers, rather than looking at the solution being a wider intersection, which makes it more difficult for pedestrians, go do your math again and look at how you could create more recreation path connections and get credit and acknowledge that that's the way people will move from A to B instead of widening an intersection. And we understand that the engineering analysis will then say that intersection's a little slower than it was gonna otherwise be. That's an on the ground sort of action that the applicant was happy to do, the DRB was happy. That's what I sort of mean by investing into in this direction versus that direction, is that those happen all the time, those decision points.
I mean, what do people feel about saying something? Stronger.
I think we should say something stronger to discourage car traffic.
Do you, I mean.
But it
could
goes
we-
in concurrent with improving the infrastructure.
course.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I think so.
And does anyone object to that?
Donna is.
So,
I mean, there's a lot of headwind against us. There's a lot of incumbent car, assumption that cars are going to be
it's just not
everywhere.
easy.
So we got to make a strong statement if we're going to have any impact.
I lived in Cambridge for 12 years, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Believe me, in the 10 years I lived there, that city went through such a transformation that you were discouraged to drive completely. I mean, you really had to look out for bike and pedestrians. I mean, they completely changed the way traffic moved there. So it is done in other cities. So.
and a lot of European
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
have, I mean, in Paris,
And
Paris
our
took a
challenge is
whole
that
freeway and converted it to bikes.
We have a challenge in our community because it was built in a suburban auto-oriented fashion. We don't have the,
Yeah.
you know, the benefit of a 14th century city, but that doesn't mean that we just throw our arms up and say, well, there's nothing that could be done. I think that's the.
So, so it sounds like we're agreeing we'll put an action or amend what you read, Paul, to just make it a little stronger. I think about, consider restricting, automobile access and reducing, lanes and, supplementing and replacing with bike lanes.
See,
Well, if you want to make it stronger, take the consider out.
Well,
Yeah.
okay,
concur.
okay.
I mean, that's what we,
I mean, the
that's what we're
impact,
saying. We should do it.
the
Okay,
impact
I'm
of
not saying
something,
take all cars out.
yeah, the impact of something like that is a lot more material than just putting a bunch of public transportation buses. You still, even if you put buses, you still gonna have people driving cars. But providing buses doesn't necessarily reduce to VMT reduction. People would still
yeah,
drive.
people will bike if there's
Yeah.
safe
Yeah,
infrastructure.
exactly, exactly.
That's what's needed, particularly electric bikes now.
Oh, yeah.
And if it's
That's a game
moderately competitive time-wise.
Yeah.
Electric bikes are very competitive.
Right, but the bikes themselves are, but it's like, it's traffic lanes timing, how much time is given to the pedestrian versus the car. And it's
Can I
cars
just,
today because it's all
can I do a
cars.
quick aside? I'm sorry, I know we're running so late, but when my son was in high school. He did a project that studied in our town in New Jersey, whether it was faster to go by bike or car. And he mapped out randomly, okay, these are the 6 points I want to get to within the town. I drove, he went by bike and he beat me 5 or 6 times.
The electric bikes were-
This was an old fashioned bike.
That's a state that has got the car obsession like.
You gotta remember the 75-year-olds too.
No, well, that's what electric bikes are.
Right.
The other thing I noticed, and I know there's been some email traffic, is people, a lot of people commented on the airport. And I know we
Yes,
said
that's
we were gonna
right.
talk about that a little bit,
That's right.
and intuitively, it makes sense to me that the airport emissions, even though the airport in South Burlington are kind of not part of the emissions that we're saying we emit and that we have to reduce 60%, but I'm not sure I could defend technically why we've got
Why
there.
did you do that?
Well, that's.
You just said you don't do, you went to the food thing because it was, or the construction thing because it was in another city, but
It's true
the
that
airport is geographically.
it's true that the airports land and take off at South Burlington. But those emissions are not happening in South Burlington, like 99% of them are happening,
Yeah,
somewhere else, and that's one thing.
Takeoff is a lot of them.
Take off of the F-35.
Okay, well, so we need to talk about it. Why is it not in our plans?
so
Because we're
interesting.
focusing on road transportation.
Course, we don't
Also, the
have
airport.
Well, I would, Sarah, you want to say what you just said again then? Because I
We
think
don't
that
have,
that's.
we don't have control.
I think that's
As a
the link
municipality.
to me
Yeah.
of where you started with this, of where can the city have influence? And, you said, we're not gonna affect cafe standards for cars, so let's not try to put in policies of
Yeah.
increasing. I think the same thing applies to rail and
Let me ask
to
the question, does that
air.
mean that we shouldn't measure it? Or that we just acknowledge we can't control it?
It's a big piece of puzzle.
I'm just trying to
How do you
technically,
measure it?
like,
Andrew?
well, no, how did we define what we measure? Like, how do we limit our scope to cars? And not other means of transportation that start and end in the city? Like, and I'm not saying this because I think we should include it, but I know there's a lot of people that are passionate about it. And I would like to think carefully about how we respond to them.
Melanie,
My
does
understanding is that
have
there,
any guidance on this subject that you saw?
I don't know, but I can check, but I also do know that the airport and I think the city of Burlington is working with a consultant to try and
Yeah.
do a sustainability plan. And I thought at one point they talked about they're doing a greenhouse gas emissions accounting at the airport. And
Yeah.
so it's not really in scope with this plan, but I think it is happening. And as I get more
maybe that's the
information
answer. The
about it,
answer
I
is,
can share
we're,
it.
we're not experts in the airport. The airport's doing their own thing.
Right.
It's also federal. And, you know, maybe those answers are not each satisfying, but collectively,
Yeah.
you know, they are where we
Andrew,
are.
Yeah, I mean,
Andrew,
and I agree
isn't the
with you.
bigger issue that it's managed by Burlington?
Yeah.
I mean, besides the fact it's a
It's
regional airport.
It's a regional airport.
Guard is
Yeah.
federal.
Well, we
It's
don't
international.
We don't control it.
Interestingly enough, Burlington's climate action plan in the inventory, they capture the greenhouse gas emissions from all the vehicle at the airport, all the vehicle fleet, but they don't say anything, yeah. They don't say anything about the aircrafts, but they do capture the vehicles.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
So we just need to say something
Yeah.
that, you know, is gonna
Yeah.
make most people comfortable with the conclusion, I guess.
We can certainly do that.
Yeah, I would think as a public reading this, that's a huge piece of the carbon emissions. And there's no way to measure it. I mean,
There's
I mean,
no way
to make a statement,
Yeah,
I
I mean,
obviously
there's no
can't-
way to measure it within the scope of this project.
Yeah.
I think it certainly makes sense to have a statement saying that this focuses on-road transportation
So-
within South Burlington.
Mm-hmm.
And that as information becomes available on what the emissions are of the airport, you know, we'll make that known.
So just to keep things in perspective, if you look at global emissions, 3% represents the aviation emissions, 3% of global emissions. Now you can say it's a concentrated fleet here in South Burlington, maybe it's, that's the global average, 3%. So if you include airports, if you include normal flights, that's what you should be looking at, 3% of total greenhouse gas emissions. Is it 6%, 9% because of fighters? Who knows?
Is that commercial,
I mean,
Yeah.
not military?
I think it's commercial, I think it's
I
commercial.
don't think it's military.
Yeah, I don't think it's military.
Well, and I think to the point of, Melanie, you were speaking about how
Yeah.
the Burlington plant speaks to the ground transportation. That's likely because there may be things that either as the owner or local regulator, they could influence on that versus things that can't influence. So I think about rail, perhaps the city of Burlington could work with
Yeah,
the trains to what they do overnight, but once they're going, it's not in any of our authority to determine what the miles per gallon of equivalent of an actually operating train through our community.
Yeah.
is. So it's, I think that's the tricky part, but maybe there's something in there where we can talk about partnering. Acknowledging it is in our community, even though it's not our airport.
Yeah, I'm VHB is the consultant who was working on the sustainability plan for the airport and. You know, we're lucky to be working with them on the transportation implementation plan, so,
Mm.
you know, there could be some connection down the line.
just a request, we're almost at 9, how are we doing on time? I mean, I've kind of had a long day and.
So I would say that personally, the first priority is there any guidance you want to be giving to Melanie to make edits to this plan so that at your next meeting, you're in a position where you feel good to vote on it? And then you do have another agenda item that you've not had a chance to talk about
So
the
I
charter.
was good with the actions in the plan. I thought that was good. I have to say, I think some of the charts up front, the one about 1.5 degrees and the one about the US contributing to missions. I don't know that those belong here. Most people won't understand what 1.5 degrees has to do with anything unless you provide a big explanation about why that's so important. And I don't know, the chart about like US versus Asia, Europe, and stuff, it feels very defensive to me. It just feels.
I think it tells the truth.
No, I don't disagree.
Tells the truth.
I'm not
It
saying
gets
it's not.
people's attention, you know,
not
make
factual.
people
It's just,
uncomfortable. I mean, this is the kind of stuff people gloss over.
Yeah,
I think it's important because we've gotten the question before,
Yeah,
why is it our problem?
yeah,
Why is it
exactly.
South Burlington's problem? Someone else should go
Yeah.
first. China should go
Okay, but
first.
I mean, if you put South Burlington on here, it's not even
Yeah.
gonna be a pencil dot, so.
But it's
I
a
don't
global,
know.
it's a
I
global
don't know how this
context, right?
answers it. Right, it is a global problem, and that's
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
pointing out who's done it seems to me to not be the right way.
I mean, I think this is the core of the issue.
No, I mean, we
Yeah.
could address the question of why we need to do something. I think the answer is collective problems require collective actions, right? If, you know, but I don't think these two charts say that.
Has anybody come across an infographic that would show a per capita for the quote average American, which could be translated by somebody to be the average South Burlingtonite compared with the average global citizen? Because that's
Yes.
what this
There is-
North
there is- there
America
is a chart.
might be able to sort of,
There is a chart I can provide on that.
because if you're
Yeah.
looking for
I've read
something to
that
say,
too.
we've got, this is why it's our
I-
responsibility.
yeah,
That might be
yeah.
a way to
Just,
say it.
just as a heads up, Vermont is about half the national average for carbon footprint per capita, so
Yeah.
that's gonna be a
Well, there
progress
was that-
indicator because of our electricity metrics.
There was a chart that I included in the deck with
Yeah.
our reorders, which shows that Vermont is the highest per capita in the Northeast, right? And that's the same chart that the Vermont Climate Action Plan includes.
Yeah, and it's because
Oh.
of
Transportation.
Yeah.
It's because of
Transportation.
transportation and it's
Yeah.
also because of the rural nature
Exactly.
of Vermont and a
Yeah.
lot of areas
Yeah.
outside of Chittenden
So-
County have fuel
Yeah.
oil, but so while it's true for Vermont, I don't know that it's
True for South
for
Burlington.
South Burlington.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean,
Because
if
of natural gas
if we wanted
being,
to put a per capita one in, that would be the one I would. put in.
I definitely have one on the US citizen versus the Indian citizen for my ecological economics course. But if you don't have Srini, I could. send
Yeah,
it.
I mean, UN through the,
Yeah.
IPCC has published a lot of stuff
Yeah,
around
it's
this,
up there, it's
developed
there,
countries,
yeah.
developing countries, and, It's the same database source has got that.
yeah, I'll talk to Ann about finding a per
yeah,
capita emissions
yeah.
infographic to go along with what's already here.
Yeah, okay.
So I guess, are people okay with the changes that were made in red? So we can accept those and then make additional changes we heard this evening for the next draft?
I have
Sounds
one
like you're gonna
question
get some-
about the
Oh, go ahead.
buildings in thermal. Looks like it's still missing the number of homes that have been weatherized.
Yeah,
Wait,
there's some X's in there.
Or
yeah,
I have an
that
old
data is
copy.
really tricky because it comes from 3 different data sources, CVOEO, Vermont Gas, and Efficiency Vermont. And I have the data, but I'm trying to pin down folks so that they can assure that I'm not double counting. So hoping to get that answered soon.
Yeah,
My,
EAN hasn't
Okay.
solved that already, huh?
Say
Is
that
it-
again, Ethan?
EAN hasn't already reconciled that data? Are they not?
I mean,
keeping their
not for-
calculator?
Yeah, I mean, not at the city level, but I'll check the dashboard. To see if that would be helpful.
I don't know if the dashboard is
you would-
working, but okay.
if you would consider adding 4 words.
Sure, well, tell
So
me what the
in
words
line
are.
with what we discussed tonight, if you go to page 17, and by the way, thank you for incorporating the sustainable ag plan. When you have your 2030 targets, the second says increase green infrastructure and soil health for, and then you list carbon sequestration, wildlife, blah, blah, blah. Would you consider adding after soil health for growing food and for carbon sequestration and et cetera? You see where I am under the 2030 targets, the second, there's 2 bullets, the second bullet. It's page 17 on my draft. You're talking about increasing soil health, but you don't talk about,
Left-hand side,
pardon?
you mean up here? On the
I
left?
think there's some.
It's
new
on, it's
second
on,
bullet.
you see, you see,
Yeah,
it says,
yeah,
right, yeah,
yeah,
it's the
yeah.
second bullet on
Yeah.
the left-hand side.
Yeah,
You're talking about increasing soil health, but you don't talk about growing food. You're talking about
We
soil
should,
health.
you should definitely add it there. And then
Definitely.
in the next page where we talk about the benefits of natural areas, we should probably add a few words about food
Okay.
there too.
Right,
right, so
Right,
we'll
we
add
say-
food here.
Yeah.
Right, when we
Scrutinize the
talk about
whole
water
document.
quality, urban heat islands, stormwater management, we should add something about food there too.
And then underneath that, you say reduce risks from, and you have extreme heat, extreme precipitation, high winds, drought. Add a bullet about degraded soils or something. I mean, those are gonna be risks. So anyway, I would hope you could consider that. And maybe in the verbiage on the next.
when
page
you
as well.
say degraded soils, are you more concerned about like
The
food
soils don't.
shortages?
Well, yeah, because the soil, well, maybe there's a better way of saying, I can give it to you, but it's nutrient
Depleted.
depleted soils. Yeah. The soils don't have the proper minerals, macrobiotics to produce nutritious food. If you don't know, I'll get a term that they use for that.
Okay.
It's impaired, degraded, you know.
I wouldn't mind getting back to Ethan's comment about monitoring. Because we don't really say anything about, I don't think we do, like recommending that the city monitor some of these things to see how we're doing.
I can add that in the last section that talks about implementation of actions and
Yeah,
next steps.
that makes sense.
I'll add something about monitoring.
Can we make it clear that it should be done annually,
Yeah.
transparently, and consistent with the inventory from this report? Because that's the biggest problem, is people change their methods and the numbers jump around and it doesn't mean anything.
And then also in that next steps paragraph, I mean, I know we're focused on transportation, but like, you know, just given my limited experience with this carbon-free ordinance, like each of these little things is a lot of work. Like each of these actions, you know, will consume meetings and people and you know, having appropriately factor in the equity implications. I mean, each of these is a lot. I think we should point out to the city that there's gonna need to be like massive resourcing to actually get this done.
Exactly.
Each of the thing is a lot of work, right? These things just don't happen.
Yeah. That's why I said earlier, this is nothing like what the city has done before. There's
Well,
nothing like this.
Sort of picking up on what I was saying earlier,
Yeah.
you could consider some kind of a transmittal memo that goes with this. What do you want to say in a cover memo of, you know, we're proud of the work, we're da 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 da, and we're recommending equity, we're recommending resourcing and acknowledging that this is a significant, that resourcing is among the biggest obstacles. So,
That's
so
right.
just, you know, something that you might want to think about is how do you want to transmit this? Maybe
And
that's
that
the
there's
presentation.
continuity,
memo.
so it's not like you hire a consultant and they do something that goes away. You want to monitor this stuff,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? You really want capacity in-house.
Yeah.
Not all of it, but you need some more staffing.
No, transmittal letter makes sense, but I think we should also beef up this one paragraph to put the city on notice, if it's not on notice already, that you know, each of these things is a lot of work.
Yeah.
I do like the idea about a letter from the Climate Action Plan Task
do
Force
too.
as sort of a
Yeah.
call to action.
Yeah.
You know, asking residents and businesses to pay attention and see themselves in the solution and just the aggressiveness of and the speed at which things need to change. I think something upfront from the task force could be
Yeah.
profound.
Is that something that would stay
Plan.
attached to the plan?
I don't,
That's
I mean,
when it
it
gets
could be
published on
part
the
of the
website?
plan, or like Paul said, it could be, you know, a transmittal memo, whatever you think. would be
Before the September 19th presentation.
Yeah, I mean, it could be,
Yeah.
it then becomes potentially integrated into the presentation.
Yeah.
You know, we are pleased to present this plan to the
Okay.
council, and here's
Right.
4
Sure.
things we wanted to say.
Can we then actually talk about that? Because it's only a few weeks away, the 19th.
know.
And I mean-
Month, less than a month.
do we need a deck? Or like, how's that gonna work?
What is that presentation going to look like? Is it just here? Take
So,
it?
so the first draft of it is what Ethan presented earlier this month at the public forum. So that the idea was that, you know, we had Melanie and Ann spend some time to make a first cut at it so that we're not starting at zero this week. I guess that the question is, how close was that to what you'd want to present to council?
What's the expectation on when they will get the full package to review?
They're gonna get it in 2 pieces.
Okay.
They're gonna get whatever, the physical thing that you vote on the 8th, which will look substantially like this.
Okay.
They'll get that one. The CCRPC has their graphic designer
Okay.
scheduled to be doing the work in September. It will be done in sometime around the 25th or so.
Okay.
So for the second council discussion, the sort of
Okay.
packaged up version will be ready.
But so they roughly have about 12 days to review, no, 11 days to review the full package between September 8th and September 19th, right?
Well, it'll be put in their, I'll talk with the city manager. Normally it goes in their packet the Friday before, but it could be ready before then and sent over to them in advance.
Yeah, I would say send it to them in advance. So that, I mean, there's a lot of details here. Give them more time to review.
Yeah.
And I think from a managing expectations,
Yeah,
council will certainly receive it on the 19th.
yeah.
I'm certain that they will want to have one or more follow-on discussions
Sure.
for this, for something of this magnitude. You know, frankly, the last thing anyone here should want is for them to say, thank you, and then that's the end of the discussion, right? So they're gonna wanna spend some time, I expect, in October, whether that's the first meeting, both meetings.
Okay.
Take, fully understanding it.
Could someone send
Wait,
around
can I-
the tech that you referenced, Paul, or if Ethan, if someone has it, I'm not sure I've seen that.
Sure.
What was done at the public
It was
outreach.
the deck that we gave at the public meeting, but is it on the website?
I-
I'm
Paul?
not sure if
I
we
got-
shared it around.
I got it from you because I presented to the EDC Economic.
Right,
Development.
I'll send it out to everybody
Yeah.
tomorrow.
So what I would suggest, Paul, like I think that deck was a good overview to the climate action plan. And the framing there was to the public to give them a broad overview of like, here's what we were set out to do. Here's the recommendations we're making, and here's the input we're looking for, right? So it was really just sort of a neutral, like, hey, what do you think? Here's some stuff. Please give us your feedback, which was what we wanted, right? That was inviting the public. We weren't trying to tell the public, like, I'm coming to your house and I'm checking your stove, right? We're not doing that, right? But I feel like in some ways, if all we do is reiterate the plan to the council, everyone gets to nod along and say like, yeah, we asked you to do this last year and you did this, and like, we're finished with something. And I feel like from all these conversations that we have, we don't feel finished at all. We're like finally seeing how big the challenge is, right? Realizing that, have we even taken the first step? Maybe we've taken half a step, right? And so I feel like it would be really helpful to not spend too long on like, yes, we need to go, and like people are going to be there who haven't been part of this whole thing. We need to tell them like, what's this all about? What have we done? But I feel like it's really important that we lead with some of that message, like we were talking about for the transmittal memo, where we really send a clear message home, right? This is an opportunity to be face to face with the council and public, and to let them know that, yeah, we've done this thing, but you know what? This thing on a shelf is not going to solve the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But so,
can I say that in a different way, Ethan? If somebody has to ask the question, what would success look like for the climate action plan? How would you help the city council answer that? What would success look like?
We met the
Right.
2030 targets.
Yeah.
No,
that's the
so it is there, right? But we have already covered a lot of ground here today. We talked so much about what needs to be get done on the equity, what needs to be get done on the cost considerations. I mean, there's a lot of aspects to this that needs to, be upfront and get committed for it to make a successful plan.
So can I suggest it's 9:15?
Yeah.
Your next meeting on September 8th, it sounds like for the most part, you're feeling good about this,
Yeah.
the text of the plan.
Yeah.
So maybe that can be a short part of the discussion, and the bulk of your discussion can be
Yeah.
answering the question of how do you want to prepare the presentation? What are the talking points? What are the key messages that you want to give to the council? It's not just the council, it's the media.
By September 8th.
Well, the plan is, but then.
No, draft of the presentation. I mean, because that's gonna be our last opportunity to work on it.
Yeah, he's right, because we need to send it out by September 8th.
We as a committee need to review a draft of the presentation on September 8th.
Oh.
What are we presenting, what are we actually saying to the council, decide handing them a document?
Right.
Yes, I guess I wasn't envisioning that you necessarily had to all vote on the presentation itself, because the presentation is just saying the plan. And so whoever's gonna be doing the presenting can maybe given some authority to tweak it and work on it, but that's up to you all.
I think it'd be great to have a draft, honestly.
Like you're talking like a slideshow?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why don't I work with Anne and Melanie and Paul with you probably as well on taking the slide deck that we used before and starting to at least stub out what the additional content would be. It would be useful to know what kind of time allotment we expect them to give us. And I'm assuming we want to leave a chunk of that for Q&A.
It's probably gonna be like an hour. It's not gonna be done in 20 minutes.
I can answer that question.
Okay.
The comments in the document, all the comments.
And I
Right
think
now
I
it is
think-
slated for 1 hour.
Oh, that's
Okay.
not, I would have thought they were gonna do 30 minutes. Yay, an
1
hour.
hour is good. I'm
They've
glad.
been-
I will say that
It's
I'm looking at the
surprisingly-
agenda right now.
Yeah.
It is going to be a long agenda for council. So the,
Oh,
you
that's
know,
fine.
including an ordinance on regulating heating, which might have 1 person or 100 people
100
attending.
people.
There's gonna be a lot of people.
Paul, do you know
ARPA
if
discussion and possible action. There's a lot on this agenda, so.
On it too, isn't there?
so
And
Paul, are
council
we at the,
discussion of budget goals. This is so.
They, with Barbara, will they go into executive session and then come back and say, here's how we decided to spend
Yeah,
the money?
yeah.
I'm.
They're gonna be brain dead.
A lot of that is eligible for.
Paul, is climate action before or after, like, where does it fit in?
Climate action is after ordinance on heating fuels.
And where is it?
It's the second item?
Largely, I mean, there's some little ones.
All right, well, at least.
That's not bad.
Right.
I mean, it would have been great to start off with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's, so the next 4 months worth of council agendas are gonna be packed with budget, with a lot of big things going on in the community. So my message is, make sure that you hit your key points, because these are human beings who are volunteers, so.
That's a lot. to
Yeah.
go through.
I mean, I just to give you all like my short take on it. I think that the goal here needs to be impress on them the magnitude of what we're taking on and make it really clear that it's a process that we need to start on now, but we
Yeah.
need to set in place procedures, support, tracking, right? If we look at this as a 2030 or 2050 goal, it all looks impossible and messy, and you like check off one thing off the list and you're like, oh, we put out a brochure on gardening or something, right? And in 2030 discover that, yeah, we're not where we need to be, right? And so I think if we can get that message across, that like we've tried to give them a lot of resources, but there's still a lot of work to be done, and that this is something that they're going to have to be iterating on and incorporate into the meat of their work every year. I think that's the most important message. The content's going to change as we go along. We're going to learn new things. We're going to get new skills. We're going to try stuff. We're going to change, right? Like, but the goal is the goal.
Yeah, I think we have to impress. This is really just the beginning.
Yeah,
The
that's
very
right.
beginning. The hard work starts now.
That's right.
Can I ask, did you decide to put all the comments in your plan that you talked about it, but I didn't hear a decision?
I'm not sure about putting all the comments in the plan. I think maybe
Maybe
we
as
should
an
just,
appendix.
maybe we should
I don't
just,
mean
maybe we
incorporate.
should just reference a link to the city website or something so that
Yeah,
people can go and look
yeah,
at
why
it.
don't we do that? I
Yeah.
don't think they need to have a
Separately.
copy of all of
Yeah,
this.
Is
Just-
anybody ever going to consult that list
Well,
again?
but
I mean, I thought you
technically,
said you were gonna try to weave the key points into the document.
No, and that,
she already did that, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think there's some utility in
Yeah.
seeing the volume of passionate comments.
Yeah,
At a minimum, the city council should
I
see all
think there's,
those.
I mean.
Otherwise,
can
they-
you put them in
I
the
would.
document?
Without the names, but
Yeah,
I mean,
as
there's,
an appendix.
I would, why not? I
Yeah.
mean, there was a lot of work to compile them and people
Okay.
spent the
to
time
show
to
the
write them.
volume of it, that was.
So I think that's a perfectly fine idea. I would encourage to prioritize the plan. And then the first appendix, which is all of the actions that you all spend a ton of time on.
sure.
And not have, and then have the comments follow
Absolutely,
that in a, but, you know, council, you know, they're gonna get hundreds of pages.
absolutely.
You wanna make sure that they're focusing on the section that you really want them to focus on, and so.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
Yeah,
what bothers me about doing that. I mean, if you could do it as an addendum that's tucked into the plan. I mean, do you really want a plan that looks this big? They're gonna go,
Yeah.
I'm also a little bit concerned because a lot of the comments are such a mix, right? We've got some comments that are like, there was a typo on page 17 that's been fixed now, right?
yeah, I mean,
So I feel like it, either we need to edit them so that they're actually the meaningful right comments, or and I'm not sure also that the people who submitted them to us really intended that they be like laundry
Well, we
listed
have
out
their
there
names.
Well,
with their
could-
names,
it
Could
wouldn't
we
have their
use-
names, but I don't think it should be actually in the plan. I think it should be
an
slotted
attachment.
in
It's an
as an
attachment.
addendum.
It's addendum, yeah.
Yeah,
So that in my mind, I think there's two options. We can do a PDF of all the comments that we've received, both individually and from the climate survey, and just do a link from the climate action plan
Sure.
website so people can see them. And then also, if you want to include the comments as an appendix in the plan, we could put in the distilled summary, sort of bullet points of the
Sure.
themes that we heard.
Yeah.
Does that
I would not
sound?
do that. I think that's
workable?
extra work.
Well, it's already been done.
I would personally just include the comments verbatim. It'll be like 10-page PDF.
Yeah.
And they're very powerful when you go through them. People
It'll
will-
be,
Detailed comments that are really show the passion around this
So
problem.
10-page, so PDF link from the plan webpage
No, I would.
or in the document?
Personally, I put it.
but are we, Andrew, are we talking about all the 153 sets of survey responses too? And
It was like 10 pages when you put it in a PDF?
well, I mean, I don't want to get sidetracked. The comments, when I put them in a PDF today, was 26 pages.
Yeah.
But that was just the survey responses. So you'll probably get about 40 pages worth.
Okay.
Oh, 40 or 50.
So that's why I would have it as a separate document. Because
Yeah.
you want the climate plan. Or probably for several years, they can go back and they don't need to have the comments as, they can look at them if they want, they can. Put them in with their plan, they can throw them out, they can do whatever they want.
So
But
Melanie,
we
let's,
really want them to focus on the plan.
let's do as we often do with the Unified Planning Work Program ones, where there's the plan and then there's supporting documents, and the supporting documents will be
Awesome.
available.
Yeah.
And it'll say supporting documents to this, and it'll be in the record for everybody to get at, but it won't make the thing feel like the kind of plan that you want to say, oh my gosh, and put over a week.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But as a resident, I want to see what other residents think. I
Yeah.
mean, I
Yeah,
think
but you'd
that's,
be able to.
I think that's
with this plan.
beneficial to
Sure, I
to know
mean,
that you're
I'm
not
not-
alone. So
Those who
having
care.
it as a second document is great, just so it's there. So
Yeah, and I think what Paul is saying, it'll be a supplement to the plan available on the website, not communicated as part of the
Yeah.
plan. Are we
just so you can, it's
understanding?
available.
Or am I understanding what you want? Okay.
So can we go over again what we're doing when? So the next meeting we come to, we're gonna see the whole document as it would go to the city council.
Right, which is largely the way you're seeing it now.
Exactly, but
Thank you.
that's what it's
And
gonna be.
we
And I
have,
had just minor,
yeah, so
Thanks.
send them to me as
I'm
soon
gonna
as you
send them
can,
to you.
because
They're
we're
not worth
meeting
taking.
again on the 8th, which is
Within days from now.
next week.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you're gonna see another version of the plan
right, which means if we're gonna write. something, we
Friday,
need to do it
Monday.
Um,
For the actions, we haven't converted them to PDF yet, so we might have to do a similar type of thing with all the actions that were considered. And that is being a packaged PDF available on the plan website.
Oh, but those are part of the plan.
They are part of the
I
plan.
would say that's part of the plan.
Okay, you want them in the
They're just not the
document?
high impact actions, but
Yeah,
they
but
are
they're
actions that were
actions.
voted on
Yeah.
by this. group.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Include
Yeah,
them
they
in the
should be
plan.
in the plan.
Okay,
See, that's what I was thinking when Sarah was talking earlier. There are other supporting actions in the spreadsheet
Yeah.
that complements the high impact actions. So I don't think Sarah had the visibility to those supporting
Oh,
actions.
Right, she didn't.
Yeah, so. Okay, boy.
You're talking about just, oops, hang on, too many to screen.
30 almost.
These ones.
Yeah.
This becomes part of the plan.
Yeah.
That becomes part of the plan, right, and so that,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
so they'll be packaged up and put in the plan as
Yeah,
independent.
because there was lots of
sharing your-
good
your email now,
suggestions.
Paul.
They will have a good appreciation for how it was organized.
And they were voted on by the task force.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
I have one more process question. Does this task force end on September 8th?
So that will be a question for council to discuss, because the task was develop a plan.
Yeah.
So I guess the answer is yes, but council could decide what to do next.
Because my perspective would be that, as I said, each of these actions takes so much, and I know we're not gonna get to the charter change tonight, but this group should get to that at some point soon. That a task force like this to tackle those actions is really important.
By sector.
However we want to organize it.
Even a
yeah.
working group.
I think
sector.
we need by sector, I think that's the only way you can make some progress,
But maybe
otherwise
that
it's
should be
too
also
big.
part of our recommendation,
Yeah,
that there's a continuing,
yeah,
or a new,
yeah.
appointment to
What do you
to actually
think,
work
John?
on this stuff.
Do you think they should be organized by sector working groups, or is that too much to staff?
Well, I think, to the question earlier, to get to the next stage of implementation will require additional resourcing. Whatever that looks like, whether that's staff or consultants or both or whatever. I think as we enter the next phase, it will be a combination of some different skills that's gonna be needed, and what the organizational structure is. Our city manager and I are actually meeting next week to discuss this, but I think it will include at a minimum consulting with subject area expertise in those areas. So, whether if we're talking about government operations, then the person who runs the wastewater treatment facility or the consultant that helps them should be a part of that conversation. If we're talking about transportation, then Local Motion and Green Mountain Power as the, major entity that's gonna make these things happen. That's how we're gonna get to the next stage of this, along with community members. And I think the structure of that we need to work on. We'll meet in next week to work on.
Good.
I mean, there's an interesting question about is there a benefit to having some high level public oversight?
Right,
where
and I think
it feels
that's a
like-
big part of the conversation too, because ultimately it's the advocacy from the community that decides what becomes the priority policies to advance. There's the technical of how to do it, and there's the
Yeah,
policy of who's gonna be the champions to
Right.
help. All of these are gonna be politically and financially challenging.
yeah. I mean, even all the scoping work that you just described requires commitment and funding. Those are resources, so there needs to be funding to support that, so it's beyond the budget of climate action plans, it's just, even for the planning phase, there needs to be some budget. So.
Yeah.
Okay,
No one said saving the world was
So
gonna be
we're-
easy.
Our official last meeting is
Next week?
next week,
next week.
What is the date of that next
That's
meeting? I'm
it.
not sure I have it on my
The-
calendar.
Thursday, the 8th.
Oh. Well, I may miss that.
Let's
Maybe in
do
the
it.
airport.
Yeah, that is not on my calendar.
What?
What time is that?
You may have to
Right.
change your travel plans,
What?
you may have to change your travel plans to be here.
No, I'm gonna be in the airport.
Oh, geez.
Oh,
You can
I'm
get the
sorry.
inside scoop on their emissions.
No, I'm gonna be in Newark Airport.
Oh, yeah, don't get there. We can't, we don't need to take on that one.
Yeah, I've gotta be in New Jersey.
So the 8th is our last meeting. I mean, we'll go to the city council to watch the presentation, but that's it, right?
Give the presentation /
Yeah,
watch.
well, I mean, I'm.
We may have to have like a
You guys are-
pizza party or something here, so.
Yeah. That'd be nice.
Yeah, it's allergies.
Okay, I think that's it. I think
Do you need us to vote on the minutes?
I didn't include the minutes, so.
Oh, okay.
Have to be in there. Ethan, Andrew, let's follow up, given especially that you're not gonna be able to be there, about how to tackle the charter change piece. And
Yes, thank you.
it's
I mean,
late now, but let's talk
Can
about what
we
to do.
stick in another climate action task force meeting the following week before the 19th? Because I kind of feel like we need it.
But the way I read Paul's recommendation, all we need to do is send a request to city council. They mobilize the charter committee team. That's what Paul's memo says.
They are going to need a fleshed out proposal, presentation, implications, just like they needed for the carbon free ordinance. It's not gonna be
Why
trivial.
don't you guys have a small working group? and
I'm
figure it
happy to
out?
put something together on it.
No, I'm just saying, I think they're running into time constraints.
Okay, well, I mean, again, I'm happy to take it forward. If folks are happy for that to happen, then we don't need another meeting.
I mean,
I think it would be good to have another meeting,
I think
but
so too.
because I don't think we're ready for prime time. I think we need to really
Can I,
push it.
so can I
Right.
suggest a hybrid here? So one, Andrew, I'm happy to work with you on putting together a draft of that, and then let's see how we're feeling at the end of next meeting. Maybe we can stay focused. I feel like we've knocked out a couple things, and if we feel like we need another meeting, we can call it there. We'll still have time to warn it, right?
Yep, and
Okay.
what I can do in the meantime is I can put a if needed date together for
Okay.
you so that you'll have a date on your calendar and then you
Okay.
can decide on that night if you.
That's a
Okay.
great idea.
Sounds
Then you'll know
Okay.
when people can actually show.
I
up.
will try to zoom in from the airport, but I
And- And Andrew, Andrew, let's touch base. I don't know what my schedule is for the next couple of days, what side of the country I'm on or whatever, so. But
Okay,
we'll
I'll
coordinate.
try and throw something together.
Put-
Similar
yeah.
like the other presentation.
Thank
Put
you,
something on a
everyone.
Google Doc and
Time.
I'll work on it with you.
Thank you, especially Melanie, for all the work you've been doing.
Yes,
Yeah.
Thank you.
you have really done
Your
amazing.
input and thoughtful comments.
Night, Chris. Night.